Okay. Okay, we start to recording. Okay, let's do it. Good afternoon to our Brazilian colleagues. Good morning, good evening. It depends where we are at the moment now. We are now going to our roundtable, Future of Classics, titled Receptions and Teaching of Antiquity in Brazil. I'm very grateful to my dear friend Fabio Vergara Cerquiera from University of Pelotas for helping to organize all those brilliant Brazilian colleagues with us. And I have been very curious and read some of those papers, although my Portuguese is very limited, but sometimes Google Translator is good enough to help to see it and to catch the point. Today with us, we have 5 speakers. Our first and sadly only lady speaker, Professor Renata Senna Garrafoni from Universidade Federal do Paraná. If I pronounce so well, I'm sorry if I didn't. Then our second speaker, Renato Pinto from Universidade Federal de Pernambuco in Recife. Then our third speaker is Gilberto da Silva Francisco, who is not with us here, but he sent his presentation, so I will later share his presentation. And Guilherme Moerbeck from Universidade de Rio de Janeiro, the State University of Rio de Janeiro, and of course, our, we can say, co-organizer, co-host, Fabio Vergara Cerquiera by University of Pelotas. This roundtable is kind of sponsored by HNet Community Antiquity. Probably you heard for this HNet American Humanities Network website, and there is a special sub-network called Antiquity, so feel free to join if you are interested, and actually you can be members. So I will just read briefly the CVs of our speaker that I try to collect. So Professor Renata Garrafoni, who is with us today, she's an expert for the classical studies, particularly from Pompeii, from the archaeology, from gladiators, Latin epigraphy, and Roman history. She has very interesting life path that she can speak later, being studying in different countries, including European countries like Spain, Germany, and UK, and of course Brazil, and under almost legendary Professor Funari in University of Campinas. Our second speaker, Renato Pinto, he has also been connected to Campinas and to Sao Paulo and to Durham University. He's actually an expert for Roman imperialism, as well for archaeological theory and archaeological practice, and some kind of Roman and classical archaeology and inscriptions as well. Our third speaker, Gilberto, who is not with us, also got his degrees from Sao Paulo, and he has been related to a variety of universities in Brazil and abroad, including the French School of Athens in Greece, and actually French School of Social Sciences and Humanities in France. He has experience in archaeological research, both from history or classical archaeology, and his expertise is actually those African connections of ancient history and receptions of ancient history in Brazil. And Guilherme Moerbeck, he's an expert for those digital humanities and teaching of digital cultures related to history of Greece and Rome. He's affiliated with the Rio de Janeiro State University, but he's also affiliated with various universities in Canada, and he's been research fellow at Brown University. And last but definitely not the least, our co-organizer, Fabio Vergara Cerquiera from University of Pelotas, expert for iconography of the Greek painted vases, and actually he has been kind of researcher by Humboldt's scholarship in Heidelberg University. So this is our speakers, and I'm looking forward to start. And we have one also visitor, is Professor Petruccio, who will join us as a visitor if we can hear. So let's start with the first set of the questions for all of you with your impressions. You are very experienced teachers, you are very experienced scholars. So let's start, Fabio, with you. So how was your studies and your research in the different parts of the world? So can you share some of your thoughts about this, being a student?
Hi, Goran. I was undergraduate student at the 80s, and I did history, yes. And I don't live in the center of the country like Rio and São Paulo, but on the south. Nowadays, a student who lives anywhere in the country can have a good opportunity to follow classical studies, either ancient history, literature, ancient Greek and Latin, but also other areas like Egyptology, for example. But that was not the situation in my time when I finished my undergraduate studies. So I at those times it was possible to enter at a career at the university without the title of doctor. So I began to work at my actual university, where I'm working as a professor since more than 30 years. And I did, after that, my doctoral study that I began at 1995 in the University of São Paulo, having a supervisor, Haganush Sarian, who is responsible for introducing classical archaeology in Brazil. And then that's the beginning of my internationalization contacts, because I did a part of my doctoral studies in Athens at the École Française d'Athènes, and that's a very important partner for Brazilian researchers, thanks to Haganush Sarian, who opened the doors and in these institutions for many Brazilian researchers that came after that. And then that was a beginning. Okay, after I had my doctor degree, that was in 2001. For some years, I emphasized the contacts in the neighbors here. So Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, I emphasized these countries. After 2006, 2008, I began again my contacts with some countries in Europe. Yes, and actually, 2014 is a very important year for me, because then that's the year when I began my relation as experienced researcher with the Humboldt Foundation. Since then I am a Humboldtiana, a Humboldt researcher with relation with the Institute for Classical Archaeology in Heidelberg. Okay. And during my first stay as a Humboldt researcher, I also established a relation with the Centre Jean Bérard, that is a research center for South Italy in Naples, connected, although independent, with the École Française de Rome. And so my research since then is very related to South Italy, to ancient Magna Graecia, and then I had also relation with institutions in Spain and mainly in France. In France, I'm very connected to a colleague in Strasbourg, who works not as much of music, that's my main subject, but with gender. Sandra Béranger is her name, and also with researchers that work with ancient music. But since 2013, I take part at MOISA, that's International Society for the Study of Greek and Roman music, ancient Greek and Roman music and its receptions. And that's a very important space where researchers who work with ancient Greek and Roman music can have interchange of the research of their studies. And that's my international contacts, so are not that much focused in North America, but much more in Europe. I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Fabio, for this extensive ideas. So let's switch to our colleague Renato. So can you tell us? So I usually use the personal names to make this easy, so not to mention hundreds times professor. So please don't mind if
In
I
Brazil, you
said it.
can use first name. It's very
Okay,
okay.
it is okay. So Renata,
It's
about
not
your
impolite that in Brazil. Yeah.
okay, about your teaching path and your studying path.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Actually, I think we should begin with thanking Fabio and you, Goran, for the kind invitation to be part of this roundtable, and also to share it with the friends of mine, yes, Renata and Fabio. Gilberto is not here, but anyway, he's going to send his contribution, and also Guilherme. I'm really elated to be part of this roundtable today. It's actually what I have to say about my time in academia is not very long, as Fabio has a very long list of achievements. But I started my undergraduate courses in the early 90s, actually 1991. I had to work before, so there was hiatus between my time in high school and then college. So I commenced my undergraduation in 1991. It was history at the University of São Paulo. Later on, I moved on to my master's degree in archaeology, also at the University of São Paulo, at the Museum of Ethnicity and Archaeology. After my master's, I went on to Unicamp, Campinas, and both in my master's and also at Campinas, I studied with Pedro Paulo Funari, you mentioned earlier on. And then I had my doctor's degree also with Pedro Paulo Funari at Unicamp. And later on, I went for my postdoc back at the University of São Paulo in archaeology again. My doctorate was in cultural history. And my areas of interest, there was quite a large range of interests, but basically ancient Rome and the phenomena of expansion, Romanization, and also masculinities, violence, gender studies. That was also part of my scope of interest, and identities. When I was taking my master's degree, I had the opportunity to meet Professor Sean Jones, who was at that time publishing her seminal book, Archaeology of Ethnicity. And so it was a very good opportunity for me to interact a little bit more with the subject of ethnicity and identity. And that really caught my attention. And I was mesmerized by the idea of studying Roman expansion with identity and how they would both work together to create a series of study possibilities there. So I tried and followed that path in my studies. But masculinities were also important because in a certain way, I felt that identities were completely correlated with how people felt they were belonging or not belonging to a specific set of concepts or political institutions. So I understood that gender was important and that being male or female made a difference. And throughout the centuries, reception was also fundamental to understand how other societies looked at the past and resignified what was masculinity and what was femininity, and the protocols and the roles that had to be played by male and female. So masculinity is really caught my attention, and I dedicated part of my time studying masculinities, and I still do. Well, other than that, I think I'll wait for the specific questions so that I can probably dwell a little bit more on those issues. Oh, and I'd like to say that I'm very pleased to have José Petrúcio here with us today. He's a very important researcher here in Brazil, and I'm very happy to have him around too. Well, yes. Maybe I should mention that Pedro Funari was my supervisor, and also Richard Hingley from Durham, because I took a stint of time there in Durham studying with him. So yes, I should mention him also. And Maria Isabel Fleming, she was my supervisor during my postdoc tenure. So I think that's all for now. Maybe later on with further questions, we can get into specifics.
Oh, thank you. So greetings to Professor Petruccia here. Yes, this is the recorded, actually, the whole session. So we can send, of course, later if you miss something, no problem. And I will actually send to all of you the recordings at the end, no problem. Okay, so while we are with Renato, just switch one letter to Professor Renata. So about your also very interesting experiences from Campinas, but from Birmingham, Barcelona, Heidelberg, and other places that you participated. So please.
So I would like to thank you also, Goran, for this opportunity, you and Fabio that invited us and put us together in this round table to talk about our perceptions on classical history and archaeology from Brazil, which I think it's very, very interesting for us all. So I would like to just start from some points that Fabio has already pointed in his presentation. That there is a link in between us, because as he mentioned, Professor Sarian, she was responsible for introducing classical archaeology in Brazil. And she supervised Professor Funari, Pedro Paulo Funari, who was our supervisor, Renato, and mine supervisor. So we are, in this line, let's say. And this is very interesting because in the 80s, Professor Funari, he started working with Professor Remessal in Barcelona University. And then it always explains why we go through Spain and UK, because it's the way that Professor Funari organized his own career. So Professor Funari, he started giving classes in Brazil, first in the Innerlands, first in Assis, and then in 1992 he moved to Unicamp, where we studied. I did my undergrad at Unicamp, and I started in 1993. So it is interesting because it was a very singular moment at Unicamp also, because we were in the beginning, in the end of the dictatorship, and in the beginning of the new way of studying history in Brazil because of the end of censorship. So we could manage different types of knowledge there at this moment. And many professors that were there, they were coming back from exile. So they have many connections also, and there was a very interesting flourishing of left-handed studies there at Unicamp. So Marxism was flourishing, and different kind of what we want for Brazil as educational projects in politics. As Fabio mentioned, we didn't have too many positions for people. It was a very Brazilian at that moment in university comes from elites in a way of another, or middle class people. So how could we change this perspective? So we were changing everything. This is the moment, I think. So I was there, and I always liked ancient history, as many of us. We arrived at the university because sometimes you like Egypt and Roman culture and Greek culture. So I was no different at that moment. And in these classes that I had with Professor Funari in 1993, I read Petronius Satirical, and it was amazing for me because I never heard about people in Roman studies. I always heard about empires, and there were lots of people over there. So in this moment that we could have new social history approach, and there was lots of people there, women and women's studies were flourishing and all these things. So it was really amazing for me, and it got my attention. That's why I always studied popular culture, let's say, in a more specific, more plural way, let's say like that. And then I also always liked languages, so I could study not only history, but I could study Latin, I could study German there, I could study Spanish, and so on. So I thought that, oh, I'm going to stay here because I can read interesting literature and also learn English, learn languages. That was the main point at that point. So archaeology in that moment, we depended a lot from the books, mainly because there was no internet at that moment. So most of times I could read things on archaeology because Professor Funari brought photocopies from the UK, and he used to travel and bring photocopies to us, because we didn't have literature, up-to-date literature at that moment. So it was something like this. So we need to travel. So we managed to do that, to travel abroad. So it is something I also like to do, to travel. That's why I also have all this singular experience in traveling to different countries also. So my master was in literature, in literature studies, in Petronius Satiricon, because I was really impressed, and also Apuleius Metamorphosis. And then I could manage to start studying archaeology on my PhD, because when I finished my undergrad, so I did my undergrad, my master, and my PhD at Unicamp with Professor Funari. But when I ended the undergrad, I could manage to go to Europe for the first time. And it was my first time in Barcelona. So there I could study epigraphy for kind of like 2 or 3 weeks, and study epigraphy and be in contact with Roman material culture for the first time. And when I come back, I finished the master, but I decided I was going to do archaeology in the PhD. So I managed to, I kept the idea of popular culture and, subaltern studies with the gladiators. But as I wanted to go to archaeology, I managed to study graffitis and tombstones, because it was a way to put together language and material culture. That's what happened to me. So I stayed there and I studied, and during my PhD, I could manage to come back to Europe for archaeological excavation in Spain. And then I stayed 6 months there, part in Barcelona, part in the UK, and part in Germany, with Professor Giselfeld, who was a really important person also that I should mention. And he really gave me some lectures, and it was very important to me to learn how to manage epigraphy. So this was the main people I worked with. First, Professor Remessade, then Professor Giselfeld. And then in 2004, and just for you to have an idea, I became professor here. So it's going to be 20 years in June that I'm professor here at Universidade Federal do Paraná. And I always studied graffiti. I just stayed in this area in epigraphy. And then I could manage to go to the UK with Ray Lawrence, when he was at Birmingham, University of Birmingham. He invited me, and we got a very interesting project that was supported by British Academy. So I could stay there with Ray Lawrence and do this research. Nowadays he's in Sydney, in Australia. And in 2019, I could go to Australia and make some talks to him also. So I am always connected with them from a long time. So this is how I managed to study gladiators, popular culture, gender, and subaltern studies, and also nowadays has reception studies, because of the famous question, why do we study classics in Brazil? Everybody asks this question, so I think the reception is a good way to answer it. So we are doing also some studies in this area. So I think it's more or less something points like this, so we can discuss it later with some more specific questions. So I think it's all for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Renata, for this interesting journey. And now it's time for Guilherme to share his journey from Brazil to US and Canada, actually. So about your teaching, the learning experience is more than teaching.
How can I speak after Renata? It's not fair to do it, Such an amazing journey that has just outlined here. A peasant will say. We will speak a little bit about my own journey, So thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Professor Goran Đurđević. Thank you, Professor Fabio Vergara. I'm very glad to be here today and to share some ideas about my own career and expectations and ideas. So I try to outline something here to say, but let's see. The first, I'm inspired by Renata speaking about their journey, and I have to add to that we haven't in Brazil such a path like classical studies. This is perhaps a good information to people abroad. So it means that we can't found in Brazil classical studies like the ones that we can found in Europe, you can found in the United States, or you can find in Canada, etc. This means a lot of possibility. So, but if you want to study ancient history in Brazil, you have to do it in the history, archaeology, or literature departments. It means that at least we have a kind of a different path from people that have been studying in Europe or these centers, traditional centers of classical studies. Of course, I think that we have some advantages in our own path, in our own curricula, because it offers perhaps a more diverse and in-depth education in historical matters. But there is always the other side of the coin, and which relates to the study of ancient languages, such as Greek or Latin. The problem for us usually was that because in my own experience, I study history, and to study Greek or Latin, I have to go to external departments such as literature department and it was not exactly very, very easy to do it because we have different scheduling timetable of disciplines. The workload became higher, so it's not very easy to being a historian and became an ancient historian because we have this gap perhaps of learning language and ancient language especially. At the end, I have the feeling that classical literature in Brazil is the program that is closest to what we understand as classics traditionally. I still remember that during my BA in Brazil, we read many somewhat outdated things, outdated authors, because there are very few translations into Brazilian Portuguese that recently was published abroad. Unfortunately, we have access to this kind of literature, and how can I manage that? Usually, our professor, as Renata just said, our professors brought lots of things, purchases lots of books in English, Spanish, French, because our libraries weren't very good in ancient history. And the problem was that reading, of course, there is another problem. We speak Portuguese, and this is our native language. And when your professor arrive with Spanish, French, German, and kind of stuff, we stay a little bit astonished. Wow, man, I have to learn so many languages to understand ancient history. Is that what I have to do it? And yes, we have to learn it. We have to learn English and Spanish and another language. But I think I felt somewhat isolated because Brazil is a huge country and a huge island of Portuguese. And then I sincerely I begin to feel that it was impossible to become a researcher of ancient history without any long experience abroad. And this is because Renato, and everyone Brazilian that we come here, we speak about their abroad experiences. So I began to study between these languages, especially French and English, and I was very influenced by them, even though it means a little bit paradoxical sometimes. I'm influenced from the French and English school as well, but anyway, we try to understand them and make history mixing influences from abroad. I think that is an advantage from being in Brazil. We don't have to fight, we don't have to don't like French because we are England. We are from England Academy or something like that. So we can mix Italian schools, French schools, English schools, and this way, I think we have an advantage. We are more freely to do anything we want to. So to be concise, my path I completed because I was just making a narrative here. I completed my BA degree in history and my master as well, my doctor, my PhD in Federal Fluminense University. I was as well supervised by a legendary professor from Brazil, is the Professor Ciro Flammarion Cardoso. He was one of the great historians. He's a late professor. He was one of the great historians of that Brazil had in the last part of 20th century. And part of my PhD, I've been in Brown University in classical studies, studying with Joanna Henning, and as well with Professor Claude Calam in French School of Social Sciences in Paris. So my main interest in ancient history has been always concerning Greek tragedy, politics, and democracy in ancient Athens, especially concerning through the Euripides plays. So I'm a member of group research of French School of Athens, coordinated by Gilberto, that is not here today. And I've been working since 2019 in the milieu. In French, we say that in a French environment here in Quebec, Canada, studying especially the relations between ancient history and education. So I think I've been studying since 2015 the relations between education and ancient history, and this is what how can I say that? This is what push me forward now to research. I think that this is a good outline for now. Yes.
Yeah, it was very, very good outline. Now we come to a little bit harder question, or at least more challenging question for all of you. So, and this is about the challenges of the teaching classics today in Brazil. So, maybe Renato, you can start to answering, to break the ice about what are the challenges that you face, or at your university or in general. It's up to you how you will start to describe about the teaching classics in Brazil.
I'm sorry, did you say Renato or Renata?
Yeah, I said Renato. Yes.
Okay, sorry for that. Oh, I have to say that even though we share the same or almost the same first name, we are not related. Okay, but we also share the same supervisors. You may think that maybe there are a lot of Renatos and Renatas in Brazil, but that's not the case nowadays. But a few decades ago, I think it was quite popular. But anyway, I'm not saying that we're old or anything, okay, Renata? So sorry if that's how you understood it. Okay, don't get me wrong. But anyway, well, Guilherme and Renato, they mentioned several interesting things in terms of how difficult it is for us to start our studies in classics. As Guilherme put it so clearly here, we don't have a path to follow, and we don't have a clear tradition of classics in Brazil. Naturally, there were those who began before us, and they had to strive to get their space in academia. And of course, we follow some of those steps. But tradition is a very strong word to put in this context. I don't think there is tradition. So, but there are ways. If there is a will, there is a way. So I suppose when we study history, ancient history, when we study literature, especially classical literature, and studies that are related somehow to the past, to the Roman past, Greek past, but even in Egypt, we open doors to further research and to further investigation. So we also open opportunities, but sometimes those doors are ajar. They're not completely open to us. We have to find ways to get permission to enter. So studying languages is part of the process. We have to study English, of course, naturally, this is fundamental, but we also have to study ancient languages. In terms of archaeology, those are not exactly necessary, but epigraphy is an important aspect to consider. Sometimes we have to deal with epigraphy. Renata is an expert in that, and as much as Funari is. So when we come to face epigraphy, naturally understanding ancient languages is much more important than just dealing with material culture. When I started, because we didn't have a very clear pathway to follow, I had to think of possibilities when I was an undergraduate student. So I first thought of medieval studies, but I wasn't very happy with that. On a sour note, my prospect of studies in that area collapsed very quickly when I met a certain professor. I won't name him, of course, here for you, but he discouraged me to take any effective action in studying medieval times. So I immediately talked to other professors there at the University of São Paulo. And because I was interested in studying at the periphery of the Roman Empire, I wasn't naturally understand the concept and the ideas that the center, like Rome, like a very important city at that time, would emanate powers that would change it when it moved to the periphery. But the periphery itself was very attractive to me. So I wanted to study Roman Britain. And that's when I met Professor Funari, because he had studied there. He had developed research in the UK. And so he helped me a lot. And as Renato said, those were precarious times for us who didn't have a very good library at home, because even at university, most of the books were outdated. So he was very generous because he would lend his international credit card to buy books for us. It was a very risky operation, I suppose, because he would barely meet us and then he would offer his credit card. But he was so generous, and we it was so handy because we could get books that otherwise would have been impossible for us to get, to put our hands on. And even nowadays, well, nowadays we have other possibilities to get books. So it's a different world. It's a different time. Even when you look at that time, it seems like another world. So yes, getting the books was really a challenge. It was a daunting situation, but he helped a lot. And so I first started studying Roman Britain and reading the classics and also, well, very important authors, canon authors, like Peter Solway, for example, and then moving on to a newer material. And in terms of material culture at that time, Martin Philipp was just publishing his important book, The Romanization of Britain. So it was a great influence. Then, of course, I had to find a thesis, yes, and this was challenging too. Because there is one aspect to consider here. We are Brazilians talking about objects and things that are very far away from us. So in many aspects, we are considered dilettantes here in Brazil. Even our colleagues, we suffer a lot from friendly fire at the university, because our colleagues, they would say, oh, you were just being neglectful about your own country. You are alienating yourself from the important points of Brazil to study something which is completely related to Europeans, is Eurocentric. So we are accused of Eurocentrism all the time. Why are you studying Europe? So they tend to believe that Roman Greek studies are basically Eurocentric studies too. And so we suffer a lot of criticism here. We are a victim of that all the time. But we have to admit how ancient history and even classics archaeology help shape a lot of nations in the 19th century in Europe and in colonialism. So post-colonial studies, they became an important toolbox for us. We could get ideas from post-colonial studies coming from the UK especially, and adapt them to the Brazilian reality, because we were a colony too. So we understand of colonization. So we understand how that works. And we can look at other forms of imperialism with different eyes, I suppose. At least, hopefully, we can do that without needing to resort to jingoism, nationalisms. We don't have that. Of course, I'm not saying we are neutral. That's not the point. But I'm just saying that we look at things with a different point of view. So we can offer that difference. So it's not better or worse, but it's different. So that's our best bet. It's a bit of a gamble sometimes, because as I said, we suffer from friendly fire. But when we go abroad, normally, if we are not patronized by other scholars, they are quite intrigued by the fact that we, so far away, are interested in their matters. So we also have to convince them that we have something to add, that we can contribute. And that's not very easy, but that won't stop us, or should not stop us. But it's a constant fight, it's a constant strive to convince our own colleagues here in Brazil, and also to convince colleagues abroad. And when we have students sitting in front of us in our offices, this is a very difficult part, because when we tell people that have very low income resources, that they will have to study foreign languages, that they will have to travel abroad sometime in their studies, during their studies, they get very despondent sometimes. And it's really frustrating. But, well, we fought, but then again, we have to remember a lot of other things. I am a white person that lived in the southeast of Brazil. The northeast of Brazil, where I work nowadays, has been remarkably considered underdeveloped by a lot of people. They don't get the same sponsorship. Scholarships are very scarce and far and few between. So they suffer from the lack of investment. And whereas I came from a wealthy part of the country. So when I speak from a different place. So I have to understand that. When I talk to my students in the northeast of the country, I have also to consider where they hail from. And their difficulties are going to be different from mine. And that's not very easy to balance. And sometimes I feel like I'm replicating a very vicious aspect of transhuman movement for decades now, and even for centuries. There is the word retirante here in Brazil. Those are people who live in the semi-arid regions of the northeast, and because of the lack of water and reservoirs, they have to move to the south of the country, and they are considered, well, in a very subhuman way when they travel to the south. They are the target of scornful jokes, and they are looked down by people from the southeast of the country and even the south of the country. So they have that stigma. And when it's a social stigma that's very difficult to overcome. And I've been teaching here in the Northeast for more than 12 years now. And in the beginning, when they sat in front of me and they were interested in studying classics, I had to tell them, listen, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but you may have to move south if you want to study that, because we don't have libraries here that can offer you material to read. And we don't have lines of research in our postgraduate courses. Now we do. Thankfully, now we can offer that. But at that time, when I started, we didn't. It was really frustrating for me. And as I said, they looked at me and there was disappointment there in their eyes. I couldn't avoid it. And I felt quite useless because I studied so much when I was in the Southeast. I prepared myself to offer something else. And when I came face to face with my students, there was nothing I could do about it. I was just imitating others and sending them south. It was something that made me very frustrated, and I felt that wasn't unacceptable. It was insufferable. I had to do something about it, but it took me more than 10 years to join the forces with other colleagues to inaugurate a line that would welcome students to study classics here in the University of Pernambuco. And you know, it's a federal school, it's a state school, so they don't have to pay for tuition here. But even that does not help all the time, because they have to pay for transportation and for commuting, and even restaurants that are offered for them here, they are just too expensive for some of my students. It's a life of destitution. So it's different from the southeast of the country. The distribution of wealth here is very scarce. And so it was very challenging for me, but I see that comparing to what I had to face, my students nowadays, they really hit brick walls and they have to overcome hurdles that I didn't have. And racism, again, you see, I mentioned that I was a white person living in Brazil. There is racism and gender troubles also. I'm not trying to mention Judith Butler, but she was right about many other things related to how prejudice acts to discourage people to continue their studies. So there are so many aspects, so many layers. It's difficult really to know where to begin. But certainly this has been the biggest challenge. Friendly fire and convince other professors outside so they can also think of promoting diversity and inviting. You did that. Congratulations, Professor, because you have invited people from Africa, from Brazil. What you are doing is really important for us. So I have to congratulate you and Fabio Vergara for offering that opportunity, for letting an open door for us to talk and to offer points of view. We don't always get that opportunity, as I said. So sometimes we're not seen as relevant. We're seen just like sui generis researchers. So, we're very curious to hear about that. It sounds funny. Why aren't you studying sugarcane and seashells in the coast? So on the coast. So we have to face those difficulties. It has improved somehow. As you can see, Guilherme is in Canada. Many of us have had the opportunity to study in other countries. But it is still there. It can be subtle sometimes, but we can feel that we are at the wrong end of jokes sometimes. So it's something that we have to consider. And it's not a question of appeasement. It's not like we have to accept it, but sometimes, well, we have to grin and bear it. Because what can we do? So we try to fight showing what we can produce here in Brazil and how we can publish outside the country, which is not always easy. So I don't know, as I said, there are so many layers, so many difficulties. I wouldn't like to dwell on difficulties only. I would like to mention that there have been improvement. There has been improvement. So yes, we are making good headway in all the aspects, in all the fields. So not everything is just so dark and bland. There are possibilities. There are silver linings. So I'm not trying to say, oh, so chaotic and we should give up. No, that's not the point. But yes, we have to consider those difficulties. We have to put those in the same equation, and cannot turn a blind eye on that. So as I said, it's a very nice opportunity to be here sharing this space with my friends in a round table, and knowing that you have also talked to other colleagues in Africa, and I suppose you are going to include other places, other studies, and so congratulations.
Thank you, Renata, for this. We have one brief sentence by Professor Petruccio. We have ancient historians in almost all public universities. It is a great community and a working group that connects and strengthens us in the context of ANPUH. So I predict this is something related to ancient history. Okay, so let's continue with the same question about the challenges of teaching. Maybe Guilherme has different challenges during his teaching career.
Well, perhaps yes. I've been working 14 years at schools of Brazil and poor communities where it was very difficult to teach because differently some of my colleagues, and I'm not saying that to flatter myself. I just pointed out that some of my colleagues just made a straight career to become university professors, but I have to work for many years in schools, and this is a part of me now, and this is because I dedicate part of my time to study this relation between education and ancient history. But I could never express myself better than Renato. So I try to do something here, okay? And we have to believe in the silver linings here in Brazil. So we have to look positive to the things because, first of all, I have to say that I'm not a professor of ancient history. I'm not a professor of ancient history. I'm a professor of theory and teaching of history in the State University of Rio de Janeiro. So I have I have to present here a kind of a different, perhaps, perspective about these problems that we've been talking. And one on the thing that's even in the traditional centers like University of Reading, we have Barbara Goff working with inclusive classics project that is very well, and in Canada we have Catherine Blouin because he's a francophone. So, but she works in the University of Toronto, and there she has been made such a nice job to outreach, to touch people with different perspective, to criticize Eurocentrism and this kind of thing, even inside of a kind of a country that still holds the flame of civilization. I would say like that. I would put this under suspicion, but of course, not everyone believes in that kind of ideological process or project. But it is difficult. It's more difficult to criticize civilization or this kind of discourse, ideological discourse here than in Brazil. In Brazil, we're more freely, perhaps, to criticize this sort of path. Anyway, I'd like to stress that concerning the difficulties, the challenge to teaching classics today in Brazil, I'd like to stress that I still believe that we don't have so many good libraries for ancient history in Brazil. Of course, it's better than before. It's better than when I was an undergraduate student. But especially in the central universities like University of São Paulo. But if you go abroad, if you go, you know, if we are not in the bigger centers, the bigger cities, we probably will have found problems to study ancient history, and then. And I would like to stress as well that antiquity or medieval world studies are not central either in our department or our curricula. Sometimes we are just one professor of ancient history for a whole department of history. So we are sometimes alone in our path to teach classics, and we have to deal with it because it's not simple. Because, for example, Renata is a specialist of Roman studies. I'm a specialist of Greek studies, but I have to teach Roman and Egyptian and other ancient worlds, cultures, and civilizations. It is not easy for us as well because we don't have a colleague to share the burden to teach these different civilizations, and it's difficult for us. However, the field of ancient history has been growing in Brazil in recent decades, somewhat in opposite direction of what happens in the central countries in ancient research. We have been seeing that in the newspapers, how classics are suffering with the lack of support from the universities themselves. So in Brazil, I think we're still growing, and this is a good news for us. And but the problems to teach and to study ancient history in Brazil, it seems obvious for us, is that ancient history, as we understand traditionally, is abroad Brazil, is far from Brazil. So we have to travel to other countries. We have to stay there. We have to pay for it. And sometimes, or lots of times, we do not receive support from our agencies of research. So this is a point of problematic situation. But I'd like to say a little bit about perhaps a non-traditional approach for this question. Something that seemed to me as a characteristic of Brazil, because most Brazilian historians who complete a BA, like me, we call it here a license. To have a license in history, they go to teach in secondary schools. I mean, high schools, secondary schools. It means the most part of the students, the professionals of history, go to teach at schools. This means for me that history education holds an important role in shaping the youth. And in this sense, ancient history may be crucial to what we call historical thinking education. Historical thinking, I don't know if people are conscious about this concept. Historical thinking is a set of skills, a set of competences that can be taught or can be learned through history. So I believe that the innovation that we've been making in Brazil, it means the Global South contribution to the classics may notably be this emphasis in the interconnection to the contemporary world through its teaching at schools. So some scholars may think that this is less relevant to the field, but I think it is. I think it is quite relevant. I will say more. I think the future of classics might depend on this new appraisal, might depend on this new relation, because you have to ask, we have to respond. And in Brazil, this is crucial. Why we still study ancient history? And this is the point. I perhaps I'll speak a little bit more about it later, but I think that that's the point: is to reconnect, and to make more relevant the subjects of ancient history to the youth. This is my point now.
Yeah, this is very interesting. So maybe Renata, you can try to continue about your challenges at your university, because as far as I understand, and this was when I speak with Fabio earlier, that actually Brazil is quite diverse and quite big. So challenges in one place and one university could be completely different from another, started from resources, from money, from personnel, from everything actually related. So Renata, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's true. Just for you have an idea, Renato and Fabio are here in this round table is in the extreme areas of Brazil. One is in northeastern and Fabio is in south. So I don't know, maybe it's 3,000 kilometers or more than that and distance. I don't know how many kilometers we have around here. So it's a huge distance. And then we have lots of cultural diversity in Brazil. So I think this is one of the main themes is diversity, I think, and how to think about this experience of diversity in teaching. So it's really, I think, the main challenge, I think, for us all. Although we are in different areas of the country, I think that diversity is one of the main challenges we need to face, but it's not a bad thing. I think it's a very interesting thing because we need to reshape ourselves every day also to face all these challenges, because as Renata pointed out, we came from different areas of the country and we are just arriving at this university to become professor, and the people from that lives in that areas have to connect with us. So it's always this exercise of understanding where they are and where we are and what to do with classics. I think this is the main challenge. But just for you have some more context for what we are talking about, I think that is something really curious that happened to me, because when I finished my, actually, let's come back to 2003 December. I knew that my scholarship was going to finish in February 2004, and December 2003 I have no perspective. My idea was that, well, I have to have some job. I'm a PhD, almost PhD in classical studies, but I think I would have to move to my parents' back because there was no perspective. Suddenly, from nowhere, I don't know, it was really lucky. I don't have another explanation for that. It opened the position here at Universidade Federal of Paraná. So Professor Funari told me to let's finish your PhD, so I have 1 month to finish, to review the thesis, to do all the, red tape stuff, to organize and Professor Funari was finding the professors to be part of the committee to read my thesis, because it was January, and January here is vacation, summer vacation. So, it was lots of people helping me to finish this PhD, because it was very rare at that moment to have a position in ancient history and a federal university. And so it was really interesting because, I have no time to think, am I going, I'm not going, is this good or not? I said, let's do it and see what's going to happen. And so as it was very rare, you can imagine that there was many people running for this position. So I got the position and moved to another city in an area of the country that I didn't knew anybody. It was interesting because my brother, he was doing his PhD here at the Federal University of Paraná, but he comes from biology. And that moment he was in Germany doing his PhD. So what happened? I came here and I stayed in his friend's house until I find a place to stay. So it was something really, not planned thing. There was no plan, So when I arrived in this moment, but as we call here, we was in the first Lula government, and then come a very huge change on Brazilian federal universities. And this, I consider myself in this point a lucky person, because I studied in a moment that we were created new opportunities to the end of the dictatorship. This is the moment I was studying, and I could be part of this new change in the country, that is all this new educational politics that we have problems, of course, thousands of problems, but it was all reshaped. And so nowadays we can consider that a federal university in Brazil has three main things we do as professor. That is research, teaching, giving classes, and what we call community service. So we have to do these three things, and also administrative position. So we coordinate undergrad and postgrad courses. We are head of departments. We do all these things all together, and we teach and we do our research. So, considering this, what happened? It changed a lot, because federal universities, they were from people from more advanced social and economic status. So it was mainly for people that come from high middle class, and elites. So it was a change when we started with those new politics for misadvantaged people in getting the university. So I'm part of this moment of social inclusion. And this includes the students that has problems in their school, as Guilherme pointed. Maybe they come from very difficult areas of the city. So we are talking about people, how we needed to learn languages, and maybe they have problems in managing Portuguese, for example. So we need to help them with that when they arrive at the university. So we have to support the student in many ways, because they are coming, and when they arrive from nowadays, many of them, most part of them, when they arrive at the university, maybe they are the first member of their family that they are in the university. So they also don't have an idea about what is this culture of doing research that we manage all day. So this is something new for them, because sometimes they don't have relatives that study in the university. It's very common to this kind of situation happen. So I believe this is the main challenge we have right now. It's how to not only introduce classical history in a academic perspective, but I would say that open to them the academic perspective as a whole. What is to do science, what's to do research, how can they manage this in all this diversity. So I think it is a huge challenge, but I'm also very optimistic, because they challenge us. So sometimes they just look to it, why are you going to study that? And I said, well, this is a good point, because they have questions that we didn't have at that moment. So we have to manage how to answer all these things. So I believe that now we are in this, it's a very challenging situation, but it's very thought-provocative, because we need to change. And of course, this is going to be part of our work when we look to classical studies, because we have also this feedback from the students, and sometimes they think they question us why to do that. So So just for you have an idea, and I'm just finishing, I am here at our department. Ancient history is the first class they have at the university because when it's on Monday, so I'm the first person they met when the classes start. They go at they start at the university and it's Monday, so there comes. I'm the first in our curriculum. I'm the first one they find there at the university. So it means that most part of the students we have students studying at afternoon and also at night. People who studies at night generally work during the day, so we need to have different way of teaching because they are coming from their work. They have, a busy day, so we need to rearrange. We can give except the same class we give to a student during the day and during the night because of these conditions. But mostly they are teenagers. They arrive at the university nowadays with 17, maybe 18 years, and some people a bit older, but most of them are very young, coming from high school, sometimes with very difficult situation, economical situation, and so on. So we need to connect with them and to open the university to them. So I think this is one challenge. And the other one is, considering many of them are in this inclusive politics, we need access to scholarships. So this is part of our project. So we have to work on it. And we have, fortunately here, nowadays we have support for these students. This means they have scholarship to stay at the university, and they have discounts to buy food, and they can ask for computers. And the university nowadays here, after pandemic, we can support part of the students that has problem with computer and all these things. So we are we face many difficulties, but we have an agency here to support students with difficult problems. So we're solving this issue with lots of problems, but I think it's okay for them to stay at the university, because one thing is to come to university and the other thing is to finish their studies, and considering all this social problems. So considering all this, we have this project, and I'm lucky I have good colleagues that teach Latin and Greek. So it comes the other challenge, that it's to engage them on Greek and Latin. And it's really nice because most of them like, and they go, because as we don't have to pay here for the university, they go and they do the courses. So it's a really good thing, I think. And the other thing, I think that the last challenge is mental health, especially after pandemic. So this is another challenge that we have to have the administrative support for this. It's come from administration, of course, more psychologists at the universities, social worker to help us to handle with all this. It's working, I think, but I think that mental health also struggles when we come back after pandemic, because lots of students have lots of problems related to pandemic, not only of course losing their loved ones, but also economic problems due to all the situations. So we have to face all this, but I think that those subjects we were talking about here, that is diversity, popular culture, subaltern studies, they are means for them to engage in classical studies, I think. So although we have lots of problems, as you can see, I am optimist. I don't know as if I come from all these, professors I have there at Unicamp in the past, that lots fight a lot during the dictatorship for a more inclusive world. So I think that's a way of keeping also their ideas on. So we have this opportunity also working in this way. So I think it something like this. It's hard, as Renato pointed, as Guilherme pointed, but I think it is our moment, and we should do the best we can and try to engage this, you know, to make things happen at the university also. So I think it's this more or less that I think. I'm not sure as if I made myself clear, but it's something very particular that is happening in our federal universities in Brazil, I think.
Okay, so let's move to the south. What happened? What are the challenges so in Pelotas of teaching classics and classical studies? Fabio, can you tell us a little bit more?
Hi. Goran, I am teaching ancient history in my university since 1991. It's a long time. This week I was trying to count, and I think I had during this time about 2,500 students through my classes. And for the first 18 years, I was teaching just to explain something, because each country organizes it differently. In Brazil, we have licenciatura and bacharelado, okay? Bachelor and license. In our country, licenciatura is to prepare a future teacher to be working at the schools, okay? And bacharelado is to prepare a future researcher. Okay? It's inverse of other countries. Yeah, that's the way we name. So in my first 18 years, I was working just with the students for licenciatura, who would be in the future teachers working with children and teenagers. Yes. And since 2008, I work also with students of bacharelado. Yeah. But anyhow, I want to focus more in the teaching ancient history at the university for undergraduate students who are being prepared to be future teachers in the schools. Okay. So along this time, more than 30 years, things changed a lot. Yes, concerning what the government understand that these undergraduate studies should be. And then we have each time much more place in our courses for the practical side of being teacher. Yes, but Guilherme is much more inside this debate than me. Yes, but anyhow, being in this condition, yeah, we are each time more worried about the way we are teaching them. I think during a long time, we teach students in licenciatura as if they were students of bacharelado. And now we professors are more conscious that we have also another part of the work to do at the same time that we are teaching the ancient history itself. Yes, we have to create situations, yeah, where the student may think about that he will teach that at the school. How is a teacher today? How he can teach it? And also which subjects are more attractive for children, for adolescents to call their attention. Yes. So things changed in this concerning this point of view. During the pandemic, there were lots of meetings as all over the world. Yep. Where the question of teaching, cause of teaching through internet, went still more than before to the focus. And then I think that when I'm saying we in this case, we all this, I don't know if for 50 or 100, but there is something very I think Brazil is maybe the country that has more researchers with doctorate degree working with ancient history in universities all over the country. State universities from Union, federal universities, and state universities from the states and from the cities, and private universities. So we are a lot of people, yes. And I think people who are teaching ancient history in universities are much more conscious now, although we do not know always exactly how to proceed to do this, yeah, that when you are teaching future teachers, we have to do a different job. Yes, we are learning. We are learning. Meanwhile, at the same time, more and more ancient history researchers working as professors at universities saw that the subject of reception of antiquity in modern times and in Brazil and in South America is a privileged approach to seduce the people to be more interested for ancient history and to see the importance of ancient history, because the phenomenon of reception of antiquity is very strong in Brazil. Very strong, and it's expressed through many ways. This is, we have to say, a traditional study concerning literature, comparative studies in literature. So you have more than 30 or 40 years people doing that. But in history, archaeology, philosophy, and other areas, it's a more recent subject. Yeah? And now we have researchers all over Brazil doing projects, developing projects, where the reception of antiquity is a way of get in communication with schools and with open public. So our way of teaching ancient history is affected by that. We bring that into school to the subject. For example, me and many of the of the colleagues teaching ancient history, if you are not in the biggest universities, we have to do all the job. So I research ancient Greece, but I teach also ancient Rome. But I teach also ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Sumerians, Assyrians, all that job. Most of our colleagues in other countries don't do all this that we have to do, yes. But then, for example, for many, many years, I didn't include in my classes of ancient Egypt the phenomenon of Egyptomania, Egyptophilia, Egyptosophia. I just work at Egyptology, yeah? And now we work all these things together. So there is sometimes a student with a tattoo with some Egyptian symbol, and that goes into class. Why do you have this you say tattoo in English, I think, yes? Yeah, tatuage, yeah. So this is a point, yeah. In my case, I always worried about having parallel activities, yeah. So since 1992, I organized the Journey of Ancient History. And we commemorated even the 30 years of the meeting. These meetings are always organized by the students. The students participate in the choice of the subject. They prepare communications. They do everything. Yeah, they organize the site. They organize the publication of the abstracts. And they do the contact with the invited, with the people who want to subscribe their communications. They do everything. Yeah. So you see, because this is many things at the same time. It's to give an opportunity to the people here to have contact with researchers Brazilian researchers and also foreign researchers, it's an opportunity to them to they themselves to do these contacts. So they won't be afraid of doing contact with an important researcher. They will do this contact. They will learn to organize a meeting. They will see how there are people all over the country, young people as them, interested for ancient history. So I think that's organizing this meeting. I think the most important thing is that they get engaged in the organization. It's more important than the final result. Yeah. And since some 10 years, we have a lab called LECA. That means Laboratory of Studies of Ancient Pottery, because I work with ancient pottery. But anyone who is interested for antiquity will be welcome there, because internally it is interdisciplinary. So there you have students from undergraduate until postdoctor, researchers in the same place, changing experience and growing academically together. Yeah. So when I tell this, everything seems to be very nice. Yep. But it's very important what Renato Pinto said before, that unfortunately we faced still a strong prejudice against ancient studies. Yes, and it becomes a kind of fight, a struggle, what is irrational. Yeah, I suppose it may happen in many countries, but when I have contacts with colleagues from other countries, European countries, I have more contact. Yeah, I see researchers of other areas interested for antiquity. I don't see them struggling, accusing ancient studies of being something inútil. Help me, inútil, something that has
useless.
No use. Useless. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. It's accused of being useless. And it's very sad to see how sometimes colleagues try to influence students to move away from ancient studies. Yeah. When students enter university, and as Renata, I'm teaching them in the first or second days when they enter the course, I see students very interested for ancient studies for many reasons, because they have contact with antiquity. And many come to study history because they had contact through movies, through games, through literature, through many other things. Yeah, and so they don't enter university with the prejudice for antiquity. The prejudice against antiquity is put in their minds inside. Yeah. It's so sad, this, because it's not intelligent. Yeah, Brazil is a continental country. Now the ninth economy of the world. Some 10 years ago, it was the 60th. Now it's maybe the next year the 8th and the 7th, because things are going better now than 2 years ago and other years ago. It's continental. We cannot imagine that a country like this that the intelligence of the country like this should study just their own history. Imagine that you say in the United States that the people in the United States have to study just North American history. Imagine that you say in France that the people in France have to study just French history. Imagine that you say in China that people in China have to study just Chinese history. This is something that happens here. And it's so difficult to understand how intellectuals with good building can accept that they do this kind of argument. So this is the bad thing to say. Né? In our country, we still have this prejudice, and people use as arguments things that would be valid 50 years ago. Accusing ancient studies of being right-directed, politically right-directed studies, what maybe 50 years ago, yeah, that it would be elite studies maybe 100 years ago, and that would be studies separated from contemporary interested maybe 50 years ago. What we have in ancient history now in Brazil are young researchers wanting to do their work concerning the same hot subjects that contemporary studies are doing, concerning gender, concerning politics, concerning science, and any subject. And we have a strong post-colonial direction in our in our ancient studies in Brazil. So the ancient studies that are done now in our country are exactly the opposite of they are being accused of. So it's irrational. I don't know. I know that in other countries we see also difficulties of classical departments in some universities with neoliberal view that intend that these departments have to be stopped because they don't bring money. Yeah, but this is neoliberal thought in our country. It's not just the neoliberal thought. I consider it an ignorance, but it's politically directed. Yeah, and this is a bad side that Renato pointed. So life is like that, and teaching and history is also the same. We have positive and negative points happening at the same time. But what leave me still very enthusiastic after 23 years and teaching ancient history, yeah, is that I see students always very interested for ancient history. So 33 years, but in the 3 last years, something new, because we need new things. We have now in our university undergraduate study of history for licenciatura, for to prepare teachers. Yeah. In EAD, Guilherme, how do you say remote course? Curso EAD, how do you say distance course? Not
It's an
presential.
online course, non-presential.
Yeah, and this is developed in 20 cities in our state. So Rio Grande do Sul is one of the 26 states. It's almost the same size of France, okay? Brazil is big. And then we have some 12 million people living here, yeah? And many people live far away from middle or big cities. And these people would never have the chance to study except with this. So I'm finding now a new kind of student, yeah, many times older, yeah, already working, already with constituted families, and they are excited about learning about ancient history. So this is the main thing that stimulates us. That's the interest that the students bring for the discipline, and I think this is the cause why ancient history is an area in the historical studies in Brazil that is so huge, so strong in our country. We are abroad, all country that's a continent, so almost so big as China, and United States, and Canada, and we are all in contact. We are in contact. We have coordinated steps to develop the area. Yeah, and we do this since 20 years. Yeah, so when we created the group of ancient history, International Association of History, we planned our steps together to develop the area, yeah, facing these prejudices that are always there, yeah. So we also acted as a group politically conscious of the importance, yeah, of ancient studies, and also, as Guilherme said, conscious that we have to ask ourselves all the time, what is our importance? And if you have an answer now, tomorrow we have to ask again, because society changed. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Fabio, for this very extensive idea. So one of the questions that I would like to ask for all of you, doesn't matter who would like to answer. Some of you mentioned those issues with the finances, with money, with the interests, also with the racism, and I would like to ask a question about those decolonizing or post-colonial issues, because in some parts of the world, the classics are considered very imperialistic and very colonial, and why we need to study this, and why is this related to us, right? So maybe if you can add some to these kind of things, if there is this kind of issue is easy in Brazil, I'm not so sure.
Yes. Should I begin?
Yes, please begin.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
Well, our colleagues here, they have said a lot about that too. Because I started studying Romanization, I noticed very clearly that imperialism was what was really behind all this discourse of uh, expansion, territorial expansion, and how good and wholesome would be to be under a civilized colonization. We have a lot of that. We had a lot of that, and we still do sometimes. The idea that if we had been colonized by the Dutch, or if we had been colonized by the English, the country would be different today. So it's the idea that the Portuguese were not developed enough, and so that's why we suffer from so many the political problems and corruption nowadays. That we somehow have emulated all the problems, all the political problems of Portugal, and well, also to consider the failure to continue as a big agent in the world, in the political world. Portugal lost an empire, but so did the British. They may not have noticed that. Many of them, I think, did. But anyway, we have to face the situation that the Europeans are better off. They knew how to do things. They have improved. They have achieved a wealthy situation nowadays, something which we have strived so much to achieve, but we never could get there really. We always fail. So when you talk about Roman expansion, there is something very funny, very interesting phenomenon. When we see in movies and films that the Romans were dominating an area and dominating peoples that were called barbarians, there is a tendency to defend the Romans, and there is something implicit there that they are taking civilization, they are taking knowledge, they are taking philosophy, they are taking the good languages, and they are improving the situation. They are taking baths and wine. Who would refuse that? Who would refuse those very nice things? And then when you go to church, and it's a Christian church, you have to learn how the Romans crucified Jesus Christ, and then they suddenly become the enemies. So it's a bipolar thing, really. We have to see the Romans at a certain time like those who are taking civilization to the wilderness, and whereas in Palestine, oh no, they were committing crimes. So this dubious and ambiguous reading of the Romans is not something that comes only from us, from viewers of movies and video games. No, actually, these ideas, they are very well placed in books and in history books. So it's a paradox that we have to deal with every day. Good Romans, bad Romans. So when I studied Romanization, my take of that idea was very much influenced by post-colonial studies. Richard Hingley's works, they affected dramatically the way I started seeing the Roman expansion. So it was necessary to create a more critical approach to Romanization. And that's what we started. But it's not very easy. Many times I encountered people that would say, oh, but you have to confess. I mean, the baths or the wine. Oh, they were really good, weren't they? And I remember Monty Python's film. Oh, what did the Romans? What did the Romans bring to us? Oh, they brought bridges, they brought baths, they brought wine, they brought prostitutes, and all of those things seemed so good, right? Of course, there was a joke, naturally, but we tend to think of Romans as people, as a people that dominated the world, so they deserve some respect. So how could they dominate so many parts of Europe and North Africa and Asia and not be respected? How can you slag them off? They must be powerful, and being powerful has to be taken as something positive. We have had so many powerful leaders. We have so many powerful leaders. There must be something positive about them. Being powerful takes expertise, takes intelligence, takes the ability and capabilities that are unique. And it's very difficult to fight against this cult of personality. And I think Caesars and the princes of Rome, they somehow are read as important personalities and people who were gifted with special powers that other humans didn't have. And then when you go to a classroom and you say, listen, we have to take a different approach here. We have to look at the peoples and the societies that were under domination, under pressure, and how they created resilience, but also ways of resistance, and how power is shared by so many layers of society. And then they are normally struck with surprise that, well, I didn't think of that at first. And then I say, okay, think about colonization nowadays. There are so many countries that still suffer from colonization. There are traces of colonization nowadays that we can see how our architecture mirrors that aspect too. I mean, if you look at the columns and the facades of buildings around the city, you are going to see classical themes there. And they are there to show greatness. And somehow when you look at them, you feel like you are being looked down. It's like you feel inferior to them. You are not directly part of them. And whereas white people would say, oh no, but wait a moment, hold on. I came from Europe. My fathers came from Europe, right? My parents came from Europe. My ancestors came from Europe. How about the black people? They don't see themselves like belonging. They don't belong. It's very difficult for them to see the relevance in some of those monuments created to draw attention to them and to draw attention to a certain past that was completely created, artificially created. Well, for black people, they don't mean much. They will have to understand why they're there in the first place. Why there aren't black monuments for black people. They look around and they don't see them. So it has to be reconstructed. The idea of belonging has to be reconstructed. And we have to consider, listen, we cannot impose our thoughts. We cannot impose our whiteness and whitewash our past. We have to consider their part in the agency of history. Well, they were not only slaves, they were enslaved people. They didn't come to Brazil as slaves. They were enslaved. There's a difference there. It may be subtle, but actually it's a completely different perspective. There were people that were reduced to a situation where they had very little to say or do, but they were there all the time. And history seems to be able to erase many of their doings and deeds. So we have to reset things sometimes, and we have to tease out these difficulties and sort out the way we were dealing with history, and even the way we choose words like invaded and dominated. words like domination and invasion, they have to be carefully misconstrued, and they have to be reconstructed. So, so I think that when I study Romanization, I'm interested in knowing how they think about the way we receive cultural colonization, or how we were built as a country, as a nation, that was colonized by a European country. And the language you speak, the religions that we have, that we live here, and how different Black people are treated from white people, how we still have to deal with racism every day. And when it comes to history, how does that apply? How does that work out? It pans out in a different way. When we read about the leaders of the world, who are they? What did they do? Who are the people working for them? Who are the people working for us nowadays? Yes. And when we go to restaurants, where are the Black people? Are they sitting or are they waiting on tables? So their place in society is important. And gender too, women, men, yes, and transgender people, where are they? The museums, who do they represent? How are women represented? Sometimes you say, oh, women are the object of my study, but women are not objects, they are agents. So we have to change the way we speak about them. And we have to give them the chance to occupy positions at universities. So inclusion in classroom is fundamental. We have to be more inclusive in the classroom. We have to talk about other possibilities. They may not have written the most important texts we deal with, but they have written something. They have left traces of their existence. So we have to look for them. We have to seek those opportunities. They have to become windows of opportunities for us to have an insight of different lives, of things that were neglected in the past. And now they can receive a new attention. They can receive new attention. And they deserve that. They were voiceless for many, many decades. Now this is not possible to admit. We have to give them the voice again. They have to talk about the past that they were creating, because we have created our own past. Past is created. Past doesn't exist anymore. We have to create it every day. I remember that when I talk about queer studies in the classroom, normally people accuse me of being anachronic. Oh, that's anachronism. We're talking about queer studies. That's from the 90s in the United States. That doesn't belong in the past. And then I normally ask them, well, have you ever heard of studies related to the Republic and Republican government in Rome? And they say, yes, naturally. Oh, but the Republic in Rome, whatever that was, is certainly not what Republic is nowadays. The name may be the same, but the content is not the same. And we hear of a lot of authors writing about democracy in Greece. Where in Greece? What democracy? In Athens? When? Where? What kind of democracy? That's not the same democracy that we find in so many countries that call themselves democratic. What is that nowadays? What can we call democracy nowadays? Is there democracy in the United States? They normally say it's a free country. Does that translate into democracy really at the end of the day? Do we have democracy in Brazil? What does that mean here in Brazil for Black people who are killed by the police in the slums? So there are so many other things to consider. And that's anachronic too. So anachronism may be unavoidable, but we have to explain why we're doing it. We have to be transparent. We have to be honest with our students and say, listen, the past matters because it matters now. It matters to us now, in the present. I think Francois Hartog, French scholar, was right. We live presentism. So yes, it can be something bad or good, it depends. We have to turn tables sometimes and transform something which may be bad into something that we can work with, that we can reshape. It can be plastic enough so that we can adapt it to our necessities. So I think that when we talk about post-colonial studies from a country that was colonized and that is still suffering from colonial heritage in monuments and in architecture, but also in the structures of our government, we have a unique opportunity to investigate how these things came to be and how they can be deconstructed. The anthem, the state anthem of the Pernambucanos, those who live in Pernambuco, say that they are the new Roma of the new Romans. So that was written in the 19th century. Why? Why are they called the new Romans? Why not the new Egyptians? You see? So there is something about Rome and Brazil too. Renata Garrafoni has studied that a lot, and Funari too. Rome was chosen by the white elite to represent part of our society, and they still do believe that. Well, that's not alien to what happened in many European countries, like in Great Britain, for example. So that's why sometimes when we study the Roman world, our colleagues say this is alienation. Oh, you are selling yourself to the same kind of discourse that the European countries adopted, and they held that kind of discourse, and you're just buying into that, and you're trying to sell that to our students, our poor students that are being influenced by you. Right? Not to think about their country, but that's the opposite. We're trying to do the opposite here. We're trying to instill critical thought, critical thinking, as in say, listen, things are the way they are because we have constructed them, culturally constructed them this way. And there is a lot of influence from our idea of what colonization is, expansion is, Romanization is. So we have, it's not an easy job, but it's our job, it's our mission, it's what we're trying to do. So it's not all doom and gloom, yes, as our colleague said here. There are ways. We just have to find the best ways for us to follow. It's a constant struggle, so be it. Sometimes we feel like it's a winter of discontent because, oh, so many people are despondent, so many people are frustrated, but we have to regain strength and continue and move on. So I think that one good way to do it is really to think of colonization and Romanization and Christianization as forms of dominance that were thought by people who were in power, but they were met with resistance. People had found ways to resist, and people were resilient. Let's look at those aspects. Let's not just look at how dominant they were and how successful they were. They had to face difficulties too. They had to face rebellion. Let's look at those rebellious people, the agents that actually worked with their communities to fight off those invasions. Of course, there was collaboration, naturally, but collaboration also means that it comes from the necessity to survive and to continue living in a life or in a context that would otherwise be deadly for them. So the way they adapted, this has importance, it matters. So yes, so now that we have more inclusion, right-wing policies are normally very exclusive, but we have had now at least 2 years of a new government, which tends to be seen as left-wing. And now we have more inclusion. And from the past also, before we had a right-wing tenure, we had inclusion. So now more Black people are at universities. And so they have something to say. It's difficult to find their way there. But I think that we are moving in the right direction. It takes time. It's a very slow process, but it has to be a continuous effort to achieve something bigger, to achieve something that is more inclusive. And it begins in the classroom. It begins in the classroom. We have to bring them a new material to study. As Renato Garrafoni said, the graffiti can be exploited. So we have ways. Sometimes we have very scarce financial means, But well, we have to do with what we have, and we have to keep asking for more money. I'm on strike right now, so striking is and having demonstrations on the streets. Sometimes this is a way to get more public funding for our schools. Scholarships, just for you to imagine, most of our students on scholarships, they get less than $100 a month. That's not enough. That barely makes a ripple. It's far from enough. We need more, because as Moerbeck said, as what Guilherme said, we have to travel abroad many times. Just looking at things online won't do. We have to go. And for our students, that possibility is normally a dream. And to make that dream come true, we need more funding. And we need more contact with the schools and universities abroad. We have to talk, not only Western institutions. So that's why I'm very happy to hear that that your university in China is reaching out to talk to us. We need the help of those institutions. Humboldt was mentioned by Fabio, but we also need Asian institutions. We need more communication, as we have to work as a community. So I think that we're going to have a better response. We can coalesce more ideas and merge into similar proposals, and maybe we can go farther. I think it goes that way.
Yes, very good points, Renato. So someone else would like to add about this question of decolonization. If you want, feel free to add. So someone else of
I
you?
think I have,
Yeah, please.
I don't know. Yeah, I think I have some thoughts about the decolonization of ancient history. I think I've been working on that. My recent papers and classes have been concerning the teaching of history and the receptions of ancient history in contemporary Brazil and beyond. I'm also trying to question. I'd like to underline this. I'm also trying to question the unfair challenges, as Fabio has just said, and Renato before, that we've been facing from other Brazilian historians. Just simple labeled ancient history as necessarily conservative, retrograde, Eurocentric, and so on. And this is a huge problem that we have to deal with. And this way, my central interests concerning research and teaching to respond some question, such as, for example, how ancient history can become a tool for developing historical thinking, and why the understanding of ancient history may be an important asset to young people. And all of this because ancient history connects young people a lot. We can maybe I can give you so many examples like video games, movies, documentaries, TikTok, social media, YouTube, and so on. And ancient history is always there. The point is how to deal with this amount of information, and especially with its quality, the quality of information that have arrived every day to these people, every day to the youth. It's no news that ancient history is used in a rhetoric of political power, often very often biased and serving obscure objectives. How to deal with it? How to respond to this problem? And so in this sense, I believe that education in ancient history can become a shield to protect young people, a shield against evil narratives that use antiquity, all the time to promote conservative agenda. But you can reduce ancient history to conservative things or conservative goals. So the violent behavior, racial, gender, and other prejudices, this is not belongs necessary to ancient history and to any other time of history. This is not the point. So you can find so many prejudices in contemporary world that we could find in ancient one. So what's the point to not study ancient history? This is a problem. I'm totally agreed with Renato, Fabio, and Funari that has been dealing with these questions for years. And a few words, in order to become a powerful instrument, I think this is possible if we decolonize ancient history. But decolonization is not a medication that we have to take every morning, It's an action. It's action. How we can define this kind of action? I believe that ancient history can help us create a useful strategy of thinking with the transcultural framework to consider the problems of our time. Renato said something before, but yeah, and I will insist. Nowadays, racism and the study of ancient slavery, and ask for ourselves, is there any ancient racism? Thinking capitalism as the only possible economic system. But we can avoid this because this is a presentism. It's the kind of a presentism that François Hartog said so many times that project in the past and naturalize contemporary structures in the past. And we can teach to the youth that, look, the past is the foreign country, as has this quote is so new. So but there is another thing that, like Renato said about Christian morality as an eternal and immutable thing. So if you study many cultures in the past, cultures that even didn't notice that that Christianism existed or preceded Christianism, criticize homophobia, criticize the femicides, approach immigration and refugees. All of this concern as well ancient history. So we can have a kind of a open mind to the past and create open-minded in the present. All these issues involve receptions. Renata is a great specialist about ancient reception, and reception involves interpretative engagement and social actions in the present time. So you have to help youth to elaborate critical thinking about these social matters. Well, trying to summarize this, I think all these themes, these subject matters that I have said, like racism, moral, Christianism and moral issues, femicides, homophobia, these are sensitive themes, controversial themes for our own moral existence. Precisely, these subjects should be discussed at schools, considering other cultures. And in my case, in my studies, the ancient ones. I believe these actions, this is decolonize something. So I believe these actions will make ancient history much more inclusive and relevant today. Questioning this form of prejudice, unfortunately, sometimes take for granted. So this is my point. Decolonize is not a medication, is action. And we in Brazil you in China, or I don't know, in another place in culture. I've been talking to a friend from Greece, and the Greeks have their own questions about colonization that not exactly ours. And we have to regionalize. I used to say regionalize the problems of colonizations to respond to the questions, to respond using ancient history. I think ancient history may be an very important, um, very important field of knowledge to the youth in this way. So that's why I'm thinking about it now.
Thank you, Guilherme, for actually for this. Just one brief question. That actually many of you mentioned you are teaching just non-Roman, non-Greece courses, and I'm curious how far to the east are you going by your teaching? Mostly you are teaching Middle East, or you are going to the Persia, or to India, or China, or Central Asia, or
Well, I have to teach Egypt too,
Mhm.
but I need the help of my colleagues who study Egypt here in Brazil. Normally, I use their works to help me, but I never present myself as a specialist. I'm very honest with my students about that. I always tell them, listen, I'm not an Egyptologist. So what I'm going to do here is to show you and to give you the opportunity to read the works of specialists. But if you need to go to an in-depth analysis, you have to contact them. So I never tell them, listen, what I'm doing here is teaching you about Egypt. I'm trying to show you what is updated and probably reappraisal of previous studies, but nothing comes from me directly. So show that the works of other colleagues that have dedicated themselves to studying Egypt. And the same with Mesopotamia and Sumer. So, but there aren't many in Brazil, so sometimes they'll have to read in English, and then that's a roadblock, and we have to translate. Have to use applications to translate. They're not very efficient all the time, and it takes an effort, and so not all of them will do it. So yes, there's always a kind of loss involved, but there isn't much we can do about it. We try and translate sometimes when we can, but it's a time-consuming activity. It's not that easy.
Okay. Maybe about you others, you're also teaching just Middle East and Egypt, not going further to the east. Okay.
There is something else I'd like to mention. Sorry, Goran. It's just something that came to my mind right now.
Yes.
In terms of using terminology, you said Middle East, yes, or
Or
Near
West
East or
Asia,
something.
yeah.
No. But you are right. I mean, but we keep repeating sometimes words, and then we stop and think about it. From what perspective is that the Middle East? You see, so we keep saying it's like, oh, look north, or that's my north, my compass, telling me that in guidance as a supervisor they have to look north. This is very European, and we keep repeating that. So we have to be alert all the time. But I'm not, I'm not digging at you in any way. But no, not in any way. But it's something that we keep doing, and sometimes we are unconscious of how things turn out when we speak, but they have an effect. There's a lot about wokeism and stuff like that. I'm not getting into that, but the thing is that yes, sometimes we have to be careful with the words we use, because even the way that we understand our own planet has to do a lot with the point of view from the advantage point of Europeans. So yes, West and East, we have that also. It's part of the equation. It's an interesting thing.
Okay, we have pretty extensive first part, so let's move a little bit more to your research. So I will start with Renata. I hope that you are actually you make your connection available. So Renata, well, for you, I will say 3 words: Pompeii, Vesuvius, and Rio de Janeiro. So how we can try to link these things? I saw in your recent book you try to connect these very interesting three and not so usual connections, I will say.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I think I have got some problems here, but now it's okay. I managed to solve the connection problem here. So it's just some point I'd like to stress because it's a new research. As I mentioned, I studied the graffitis regarding more to this connection with different kind of ways of writing and how Latin could arouse in different way and in more linked, let's say, like that to ancient world, to ancient Rome. But as I was doing some research on classical reception for all these issues and interests that my colleagues has really pointed out, and they are very important about from a post-colonial perspective and all these things. What happened is that I was struck by the situation that Curitiba has a very strong reception here from classical world, mainly Greece. Here is more common Greece. But as I told you, I was very fascinated for Roman world throughout Petronius Satiricon. And the first time I read Petronius Satiricon was translated by Paulo Leminski, who was a very interesting poet. He died in the 80s, but he was a poet here from Curitiba. He was born here and he spent his whole life here. And he was very linked to the countercultural movements. And this is the reason that he decided to translate Satiricon, what was not very usual thing, because we didn't have, until the 80s, Brazilian Portuguese translation to from Latin. So we used to manage translation from French, from English, but not really from Latin. And Leminski did that. And mainly scholars don't like, but he's very interesting in the way he did it, because if you read his introduction, he explains us about his view about Roman past, and it is the way that Academy later was going to read. So in a way or another, he was a poet, and he comes some issues about how to study popular culture that at that moment scholar was not doing in Brazil. So it's very interesting to understand this from this point of view. So I really got interested in how counterculture movements was reading the Romans. So it's in the first place and also in other moments. So I was with these questions in mind when I got the opportunity. So I was doing reception study from local poets, literature, the way they understood Greece, the way they understood Rome in the early 20th century until the 60s, more or less, in the 20th century. And I was invited to this international project that it's based in Spain, in Madrid, with Professor Mirella Romero Recio from Carlos III University, and Jesus Salas from the Complutense, the University Complutense of Madrid. So, and the main question of this international project that joins more like scholars from Spain and Latin America. The first moment we focus in Pompeii, and we are in this second project that we are also looking to the Greece, how Greece arousing these politicians and arts and architecture in Latin America. So in this second part of the project, Fabio is also part of it nowadays, because we are looking for the South Americans Athens, because as Renata pointed out, people used to say, we are Brazilian Rome, we are Colombian Athens. So what means this thing? So that's what we are interested in this moment. So in that moment, while I was looking at Pompeii, I decided to do some research, but it comes pandemic, so I did it all online because we have this huge digital project from our national library that, you know, you can find any journal from the 19th century online, which is wonderful for research. And then I started realizing that Pompeii was very popular in the 19th century journals. You know, people travel to Pompeii and told their stories there, or there are lots of things happening, especially due to the last days of Pompeii. So there are lots of reviews and, you know, the translations of the last days of Pompeii here in the 19th century of Brazil. So I got interested at this point, especially in Rio de Janeiro. And I must say I had to link this to the beginning of classical archaeology in Brazil, which is linked to Emperor Teresa Cristina, because she was from the Bourbons family and she was born in Naples. And then she got married with Dom Pedro II. So our classical archaeology and the first archaeological artifacts from Pompeii and from other areas of the Roman empires and also from Greece arrived in Brazil to the National Museum with Teresa Cristina. And she has a very important role in it. So I started studying this, how Pompeii shaped classical archaeology in Brazil, because as she comes from Naples and they have all those politicals links and connection, and she was very worried about, you know, continues the Bourbons politics on linking the ancient Roman Empire with their moment. So I thought it was interesting to join how Pompeii was important to the beginning of classical archaeology in Brazil, and also our imaginary about Roman past. So how did it comes to literature, how this comes to art, because there is not too many studies for all these things that it was mentioned before. For example, how we just arouse some ways that painters, in the second half of the 19th century, they used to do, they created a new Pompeian style that is very popular among Brazilian people. So we have houses that was painted with Pompeii styles. And it's a very curious thing, because in 1889, we became a republic. And you must say, oh, it was an imperial thing, so it just disappeared. But no, because something really, an accident happened in 1891, and one Republican and abolitionist, very important person, he decided to do his grand tour, and he died in Vesuvio. So Silva Jardim died there in this accident inside Vesuvius, Mount Vesuvius, and then abolitionists and the post-abolitionists and Republicans starting talking about the Vesuvio as a revolution, as a way to change Brazilians' politics. So we have these shifts, but Pompeii until 1930s in Brazil and Greece, it doesn't disappear in our debates, in their lives, and at least in this political situation. So my point in this paper is in this research is to understand how this cultural roles in masculine politics with literature and national identity, and where we are, who we belong, why we're doing it, what does mean republic, what does mean empire, and how this different kind of discourse that comes from politics in a political sense of view, but not only, because in daily life, people was reading books about it, was traveling to Europe. So how this contribute to segregate a part of Brazilian identity in a more European way, and left aside indigenous peoples and Afro-Brazilian people. So how this kind of thing worked? This is the point I wanted. And then we can see that in the 20s, how this changed and how people from left wing started reshaping these discourses, because that's what Paulo Leminski does. Exactly what he does in literature. He becomes defending a more diversity and lots of popular culture people, like we are common people, no wealthy people. So throughout Satyricon and his translations of the Roman world, before academy, he was defining what we should call in a way or another those post-colonial thoughts, you know, what we should call, because he was translating and debating during the 70s and the 80s another Rome and another Greece, which is the one that's not for elite but for everybody. So it was his way of changing challenging some discourses that at that moment nobody was doing that. So that's what I think very particular at Leminski. So I'm trying to do both things: how the thing arose in the 19th century from the beginning, and how it's a very important shift and how it works, because I think it's very interesting to see before and after and what's going on in between. And of course, I'm not doing this alone. I have my students that are really helping me doing their own research on this. And so I think that this maybe in this context helped me to avoid a little bit this kind of prejudice that my colleagues are talking about, because people are understanding that there are shifts and there is not only one way to use antiquity. So as we are working with local poets and with local culture that includes our own university, because the symbol of our own university is a neoclassical building. So people, it's very, people really see it, how it works and how discourse changes, and also these conflicts and these tensions. So it's something like that that I'm trying to say. I'm not sure as if I made myself clear, but it's to understand how we have the beginning of classical archaeologies in this imperial context, and then the shifts, and how left-wing people and people that are not very comfortable with discourse change this and produce another thing. That's something really interesting to understand and to face, because it's inherent to our own history. It's not something alien. It happens in different moments in Brazilian history. So when people started to understand that, I think it's easier for them to get that, oh, okay, so classical is not always conservative. So, you know, this kind of idea, it just fall apart. So it's something like this.
Yes, so just to continue, Renata, you actually discuss these challenges, and these challenges of, I will quote you, of meeting printing volumes with the digital world, right? So what could be digital humanities approach or changes to study of the classics from perspective of Brazil?
Yeah, I think that it's like what I told you this moment. I was, you know, the project, this one that Mirella invited me, it started in the end of 2019. And suddenly 2020 come pandemic, and I was not only on this project, I was also head of the postgrad course. So I have an administrative position and also the research, and I was like, what am I gonna do? Because I need to do something. But I knew that from the students that we have this huge project from our national library that digitalize all these journals and so on. And then I discovered that's not only that, they also digitalize all the photographs. So we have in our online, free of charge, you can download. You have to ask permission, but most part of it is open access to all the collection of photographs that Dom Pedro and Teresa Cristina have, including their trips to Egypt, to Pompeii. So I discovered that we have in Brazilian National Library a huge collection of photographs that how was Pompeii in the 19th century on photographs and the way it was being excavated. And I didn't know that. I just realized because as I couldn't travel to Rio, I noticed that through this we could change our way of understanding the relationship between classical archaeology and Brazil. So I was like, wow. And then when we started doing this and my students helped me, it is a huge thing, it's huge. And there is lots of entrance and possibility. If you type there Pompeii, it's going to arouse tons of newspapers, new photographs, books. I discovered that we have here digitalized books from the 16th century, and it's all digitalized, and we can download them, some Renaissance books, because it comes from the emperors, and they digitalized that. And these collections, from the 19th century, it's all digitalized. So it was really amazing for me, this part of it, because it's all considering Brazil, what we have from classical in the 19th century, and it's digitalized and open access for anyone that is interested to look for it. And it's not only these, but of course, the access to European museums and so on. So I believe that nowadays, I'm more comfortable with, digital humanities. And so I believe that for us, that we have all these problems that we are mentioning here, when we do not have money enough to support our students to go to Europe, they can do good research here because they can access European museums, British museums, and international databases with epigraphy, bases, different kind of projects. So it's, as I think it was Renata that said, it is another world we are living now if we consider what the moment we studied. So our students, they have much more resource to reach these sources, and it's not just the let's say the ones that are in Europe or in the US universities, but also in our library. And I believe that people from abroad doesn't know all this, and it's open access. So if you want to check a photo from Pompeii, you can just go there and type it, and there comes hundreds of photos of Pompeii's excavations and so on. So it's really something that struck me, and I'm handling this because, as I always say, I'm a very analogical person. But this experience was really interesting because it really changed a lot my mind about what we can find on these collections and how we can work it, because it's really a great tool for us to have access to important evidence or books that maybe we could not have, although we're going to Europe. So it's something like that I think.
while we are, thank you, Renata. And now maybe you can take a brief rest and have a cup of coffee. And I will now start to continue with Guilherme, then with digital humanities. So Guilherme, you are kind of expert in, not kind of, you're real expert in digital humanities. So how will digital cultures change the narrative competencies according to your idea and research?
First of all, I think you're a very kind person. So I not consider myself an expert of digital humanities. Not at all, not at all. But I'm very interested in this subject matter and how digital humanities can influence our perspective of making research. So, for example, Renata has just said about a way to use these resources of digital resources to make research easier, to resemble data easier, and to use it to our own goals. But there is another way. I want to discuss it. I want to discuss this other way is to consider the digital humanity as an epistemological perspective. The point of view that uh, digital humanities are not just digitalizing things, are differently construct a new kind of knowledge, departing from this this concept framework. Well, my interest in digital humanities are a special relation to the history learning and what we call today digital public history. So I have been supervising several master dissertations in this field. But to make it easier for you, I'll give you just an example of a paper that will be published this year in Brazil. Hopefully, I hope so. Really. So uh, this paper, I'll show you an example to make it easier. There is a project in Brazil. There's a project supported by the Brazilian far right, with a strong base in Catholic conservatism that is called Brazil Paralelo. It's parallel Brazil, something like that. Brazil Paralelo. And one of the posts on their website, one of the posts that I found it there. Sometime the Brazil Paralelo, perhaps it may make it clear. It resembles that. It sounds like terre et peuple. Terre et peuple, land and people, is a website, a French website of the supported by the Front National, the far right wing in France. So this is our in quotes Terre et Peuple de Brasil Paralelo. So the text that I've been analyzing, it's entitled Western Culture, See the Three Pillars of Culture in the West. This is the title of the article. So Brazil Paralelo is trying to articulate there the three pillars. What is that three pillars of the culture, the Western culture? They are, firstly, Socratic philosophy. Secondly, Roman law. And third, Christianism. But when they said Christianism, they mean Catholic Church. Catholic Church as the basis of the West, of the Western thinking. Let's put it like that. But what they are trying to say are two things. First things is that the church have brought countless benefits to humanity. And the first one was the advancement of science, the progress of science. This seems to me paradoxical anyway, but they put that. The church, the Catholic Church, has has supported the progress of science over the centuries. And the second one is that Catholic Church and the Christianism made the, can I say that better? Put men and women in the same position, so in an egalitarian position, valorizing so the role of women in societies. So these are the two main arguments of, but based on Socratic philosophy, Roman law, and third, Christianism. So Brasil Paralelo is amazingly delusional paper, but it's very dangerous anyway, because what is the matter there? They are reaching, Goran, 1,000 and 1,000 of people, quite different from my YouTube videos. No, I have 2 or 3 students that go to the internet to see my YouTube videos, but the guys are putting, this is not a video, no, it is a text. This is an article, a very short one, but I'm sure that the people that went there to see it, to read it, are very and countless more than I could have in my own videos in YouTube. I don't want to be famous. I'm not complaining about it, but I've been questioning myself how to better communicate, how to outreach better. This is the point for me, trying to answer. I'm trying to answer the questions about digital humanities today and the relationship with youth and this kind of biased information. You know, today you are dealing with so many processes. I do not know exactly where we are going with the Zoomers and Alphas, with the Generation Z and Generation Alpha, but they are showing us that fragmentation of information and the overload of information is striking their own future, is striking their own perspective of critical thinking. Look, I've been reading some articles about the ADHD. ADHD, it means attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. What a name. It's better to say the ADHD. Anyway, the point is, these sort of diagnoses are increasing every day. No. And medicine, psychologists, and society question whether these are new cases. They are new cases, just that, a new wave of this disorder, or if we have found more sophisticated ways to diagnose it, the real number of children with this type of disorder. So I'm sure even if we are dealing with side effects of this new fragmented knowledge in a hyper-connected world, the problems of the Web 2.0, 3.0 are there for us, and are there for us as historians as well, because the fake news are there. And this is the matter, how to deal with this fake news. I think that once we have new generations of historians, I'm not sure that I'm new generation, but we will have, hopefully, a new generation of historians committed to this field. And I mean, to making connections between digital humanities and ancient history. So we can produce in this way a positive response to fake news that's circulating in the internet and using ancient history to, to construct, to build an image of the past, like the past responding to conservative agendas. And this is what I'm researching now in this connection between digital humanities and digital history and digital public history, sorry, and the problems of ancient history. So I think we really have to concern this kind of field and challenge, because the problem is from where people and youth are taking this sort of information, and from to what they use it, this kind of information. So as a historian, I have an ethic dimension of my work to fight against it. And the way to fight against this is to create as well a kind of channels, kind of anyway, channels, TikToks, small videos, anyway, and work with parents, work with our students to build a response, really response to the misuse of ancient history and these narratives on social media and social network and this kind of thing. That's it. That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, this is very, very interesting using of the digital humanities and this changing the narratives. And actually, can you just say a little bit more about those sensitive topics about the ancient world, how to deal with them? Doesn't matter, not just in digital world, but also in those traditional ways to approach it, because I know that you are researching this as well.
Okay. There's a concept from Hayden White, the practical past concept. It's a very interesting concept because they approach the idea that we've been living in the present, still connected to the past. Of course, we have lots of studies about memory and reconstructions about memory. There is a field of memory studies, and they will, of course, approach a similar idea. This, like the French guys used to say, the present times, the present, the history of the present. History of the present is, in a way, histoire du temps présent. Is a way to approach this similar thing. But practical past resounds to me an interesting concept to approach how people deal with the traumas of the past, how people deal with in everyday life with the past, like Jan Hirsen, very Didetsky of history in German, used to say people are looking for answers, and when they are looking for answers, they search history. They inevitably search history of the family, of the neighborhood, to answer this question and to, in a sort of way, complete their own being, complete himself with this information. So the point is, this practical past connects us to sensitive, controversial narratives. And we are living in a world of war, unfortunately, today. And for now, for us historians and ancient historians, it's very difficult to deal with, for example, the war now in Palestine, because there are so many narratives put into the table. I will just say one example to make it clear, and to left is as a problem, not a solution. I'm not here to bring any solution for the things, but to make it more problematic, difficult. For example, Benjamin Netanyahu, the first minister of the State of Israel, in the interview in NBC, the very, very known channel of USA television, he just said something nearby this. We are not fighting just our war. We are fighting the war of all civilized people. Oh man, we're going back to this discussion, civilized versus barbarians. In ancient history, as you said, everybody has said, we've been discussing this from the 60s, this dichotomy, this the separation, the split things of one side, civilized people, another side, barbarians. This kind of it was criticized by firstly from the Edward Said, isn't it? Orientalism. So, and this is the problem. I mean, this is just just the beginning of the labyrinth that we have to go through. This is not the point of using, in the social media, in the television, this kind of discourses, because this is a sensitive problem. This problem of Palestinian people or Jew people, they are connected to the past situation, but these pasts are like a plastic model that the present sometimes make it worse or better, depends on the ideology, depends on what you are supporting as a political agenda. And that's I'm afraid of, because we have a very difficult and complex discussion into academy, but this matter, these subjects are circulating all the times in society. I'm not, as I said, I not have the answer, but we have to be more near, or have to be nearby society, perhaps, and how to do it. I don't know the answer, but I have a clue, and my clue is education. Sorry to insist on it, but I guess is education, because when we touch with younger people, younger persons, we can have more open-minded people to accept, to reflect, to to not take the prejudice as a second nature. Far from it. So this is my point. And digital humanities today is an inevitable thing. Is impossible to not deal with, to not consider it seriously, and not into the academy, but in the things that we produce. And this is why I think that we should think of outreach, to reach more people, to speak to the public. I think we have to make a movement in this way.
Okay, thank you for this kind of your interesting comments. Now you can also enjoy some kind of coffee, and I will try to continue with actually with Fabio. So Fabio, I will just say for you Athens in Brazil. So what is the reception of Athens in Brazilian and Latin America? I know that you research, among other topics, that you research this reception of this toponym in the actually and presentation of this toponym in the those classical in those Latin America and South America. So please, can you say a few more words?
I'm sorry that it's been difficult for me to focus here in the round table in the morning, because the tragedy in our state since the round table began evolved a lot. So I'm having to accompany the news, and people here in Brazil know you don't know what's happening here. Many parts of the states are underwater, and now the capital. The water is entering the lower part of the center of the city. It's probably the evolution in the next hours to be the largest flood of all history and of our city. And the flood, one of the floodgates already didn't support anymore, and water is entering through is Gotus fluviais. I don't know how to say this. And many of the cities, people are being brought from the roofs of their houses. It's a tragedy. There is not enough helicopters in the States. They're coming from all country people are dying. And it's a tragedy. It's difficult. Yeah.
Wow.
My city is still okay. But the water is coming because we are in the way out of the water. So it will arrive here. 1, 2, 3 days. It's the water comes through here. Yeah, and it's a real tragedy. I said I teach through the online course to 37 cities. And many of them, one is called Arroio dos Ratos, the other is Agudo. The whole city are underwater. So many students lost everything. Yeah, it's very, very difficult. There are people waiting already for 1, 2 days over their houses, waiting for help. It's very difficult. Very difficult. I cannot focus. I'm very sorry. Very difficult. Yes, I've been working. Yes. With the reception in 2 main lines in the last years. One is the same one I'm working with Renata. It's the idea of a city naming itself as Athens. Yeah, that began with São Luís do Maranhão, the capital of a northeastern state. That was settled originally by French and specific history. And already in the first half of the 19th century, they are called the Brazilian Athens. After that, many other cities in many different states had also this. In some moments, it was something important, in others, not anymore. Some cities had this attribution more recently. There are some states where are the 3 or 4 cities say no. Me, I am the São Paulo, for example, is always numbers are always more exaggerated than the rest of the country. So there are 4 Athens, I think, and they say no. I am the real Paulista Athens. So, and that's very interesting how you see the elements of projection of identity that are important in some moments. In other moments, they are not important anymore. And Minas Gerais, I identified 3. Until now, 3 Atenas Mineiras, as Minas Gerais is divided in many internal regions, like Zona da Mata zone, and then each of these areas tend to have its own Athens. Yeah, and so we are studying why it has been important, why this attribution. Yes, and it's a kind of reception study where in some moments, some people do a projection of antiquity in the identity of the city. And some way, an idealization of cities, of course. It's not, we cannot think that any of the cities was really Athens. All the cities had normal social problems, slavery and things. It's not a question of idealizing. It's, of course, a question of imaginary mind, yeah, mental seed, like say the Benedict, the first name, Benedict Anderson, imagined city, the imagined city, yeah. Another line, and we have in other countries. I was recently in Cuba last year, and then I began to study Matanzas, that the Atenas Cubana, Matanzas in the north, some 70 kilometers east from La Habana, yes? And it's a very interesting, it's very actual, it's very today still. It's come from 19th century, but Matanzas today is very Athens, yeah? And, but the other line of study is more concerned with my, it's a consequence of my main study subject, that is the iconography of music in ancient Greece, that I studied first mainly through the vase painting, first studying the vase painting of the vases produced in Athens, named Attic vases, yes, and since some 10 years studying the vase produced in South Italy, in this pottery named that Greek influenced tradition. And But then I do not work anymore just with the face painting, but with other iconographic supports. And mainly I study music representation through the representation of the musical instruments. Then there is a mirror study, mirror, that I began to develop in some 7 years, I don't know exactly. At the beginning, it was something just for amusement. Yes, I thought that it was interesting. It was not properly studied. I began to collect representation of musical instruments in cemeteries. Actually, first, since 2002, 2003, to understand why Pelotas, the city where I live, was named Athens of the South, in this sense, south of my state, of Rio Grande do Sul, not Brazil, but of Rio Grande do Sul. Yes. And then I observed the presence of the ancient Greek and Roman musical instruments in the city, what I called urban iconography. Yes. Statues, monument, architecture, paintings, yeah, in many representations in the city. So I did a connection. I saw the two lines were connected. Yeah, some way. In some way, there is a point where the study of the Athens of Brazil and the presence of ancient Greek music, they match them, the two projects. Okay, but in the first years, I was studying the presence of the Greek instruments in the cities. Okay, but since 2015, 16, 17, I began to observe that these musical instruments were present also in the cemeteries. It was the consequence of being advisor in the master studies of a researcher that lived in the Bagé, a city 200 kilometers north from here, on the frontier with Uruguay. And then she worked with the cemetery of this city, but she was traveling all over Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, and world, making pictures of cemeteries. And then she was sending me, as she knew that it was interest for the musical instruments, images of tombs where there was a musical instruments, specifically not just ancient Greek instruments, but very often the lira or the guitar or something stylized. Yes, and as I was, then I myself began to collect these images, and I thought that it was a serious subject. That was not just a curiosity. And then I have now hundreds and hundreds of these tombs, not just from Brazil, but from Europe. And I do the research in field and through bibliography and through internet. I have published just 2 or 3 papers, yes, until now, but I am systematizing kinds of situations where these musical instruments are there, yeah, and it can be related to someone being a musician. It can be related to someone being occupied or with cultural activities in general, very often poets, but other things too. It may be related with people who are well considered in the communities for being at the same time very cultivated people, but having an important public contribution, either as politician, as a professor, as a journalist, different kinds of contribution for the society. Yeah, the presence materially may be an sculpture with a woman with a lyre, for example. It may be a tomb with a lyre over there, the lyre, the string, the instruments. It may be a bronze plate or a marble relief connected to the lapid, to the steel. There are many kinds of situations. Yeah, in some times we have at the same time the representation of the ancient Greek musical instrument and the modern instrument played by the people, by the one who was originally buried there. Yeah. So Now I have to produce more systematization of this material because I have a lot, really a lot. And it seems to me that the origin is Italy. Yeah, and from there to other European cemeteries, and from Italy migrated to Brazil, to Argentina, to Peru, to Uruguay, sculptors or musicians, yeah, who knew this presence of musical instruments in towns, and then from 1880, 1890, we have the presence of this beginning in towns, for example, in Rio de Janeiro, at the same times where Renata is analyzing these pictures. So the same capital of empire where the emperor and Teresa Cristina, who came from Naples, she was the owner of some of these properties there that were being excavated. Part of the collection of antiquities from the Naples Museum that existed at the moment came to Brazil, to Rio de Janeiro, and at the same time, in the cemetery, there are tombs, with the representation, and it came of ancient Greek musical instruments, and it happens not very later, one generation, not more than 2 generations later than it happens in Italy, in Russia, in St. Petersburg, for example. Lots of these tombs in the tombs of all these famous composers. Many of them have the musical instrument attached to the tomb. Yeah, and there is also to be studied concerning the material aspect of this, the artistic element, because sometimes it's very good worked. Yes, and so we have to go into who was doing this. Were they immigrants? Were they people educated here? Yeah. Sometimes are very cultivated in the way they approach, for example, mythology, in the way they approach the ancient Greek symbolization of the role of music in death. For example, in Rio de Janeiro, the tomb by Niccolo Rollo, he's from Bari, a tomb of a musician from Bari who was established in Rio de Janeiro, that is Orfeo and Eurídice. Great. Yeah, there is another one called Euterpe. Very interesting interpretation of mythology in both dams, but interpretation is not just reproduction. Yes, recreation. Yeah, so you have also very important artworks. Yeah, concerning cemeterial art. Yes, with the presence of the ancient Greek music. Yeah, so there are many aspects to be considered there. Just to go into the end, yes. For example, in Matanzas, that is maybe in Antille, Caribbean area, one of the cities more connected with this idea of being Athens is still today. Yeah. The connection with the stringent instrument, the lyre, is very strong. There are many tombs with ornamental lyres in the gradil, help me, this protection of metal around the tomb.
A fence, I guess.
Maybe iron, iron. Yeah, there are many stylized lyres. Yeah, and then I was taking pictures there, and then there was a graffiti done 1 month before the meeting. There was the first meeting of historical archaeology in Cuba, and that was something very modern, and a young, sitting connected to flight and earth, and he was playing the lira, and something that connected it to his body. to be very strong, yeah, that shows that this connection of Lira and being Athens is completely actual, and something that's not just elite. It's in a graffiti expression, so popular art expression, yeah. And then I saw both matching together, yeah. And then it has to do that, just to conclude, in the reception of antiquity, I think that lyre is an icon, very strong, that reaches much, much more than the musical frame. Because if you go into the written sources, we know that in 19th and early 20th century, there are a lot of clubs, musician groups, worker group organizations, carnival groups, name it, Lira. Many groups, even literary or just fun clubs. So the symbol Lira is very strong, not just as an something to be seen, but to name things. Yeah, and some way, this idealization of antiquity as an ideal for the future that these cities in late 19th century and early 20th century idealized, the Lira symbolizes somehow, in some situations, the idea of antiquity. And as something to be a model. Yeah. And so, for example, one of the towns in Rio de Janeiro is clearly from a positivist person. Positivism is also religion, religion, philosophy, and political orientation. In Brazil, that comes from France, from Auguste Comte, and it has a political view that influenced a lot Brazilian politics from end of monarchy and first decades of republic. Yeah, and the town has a phrase of Auguste Comte written there. That's a very known one. I don't remember now, but the order as a goal, progress, and it's a very known phrase. And in the middle of this, designed the lyre. Because lyre, music in Greek, the modern music is harmonia. Harmonia, music. Music is something larger than what we name music. Music is larger than that. Specifically, harmonia. Yeah. And so the positivism has a whole idealization of order, harmony, and they put a lyre there. It's just one example. So that's it. I got in love with for this subject. Although people say, "Are you crazy going to cemeteries all the time to think that's thing?" So there are some days that I don't. I really no. Today I don't want to go to cemetery. Okay. I will research in the internet. But it's really when I find the stamps, yeah. And most cemeteries have, yeah. Although it's also a question that talks about a lot about the city, what you see in the cemetery, and how the city is very related. It's something that studying cemeteries I perceive it, but it's another subject. Yeah, okay. But I tried to explain a little bit some things I'm doing with reception studies. Yeah. And I begin my talk here. I want to end with this, with people who are needing help here. Yes, this solidarity. And if you can divulgate among your contacts, thousands and thousands of people who have to begin their life from zero. Yes. And a tragedy. We don't. Last year was a year of a tragedy after another. So climate change is bringing its consequence. I don't know. Societies have to change the way where they are living. Yes, that's it. But we have plenty of rivers in this country here. What we consider something marvelous to have a lot of rivers. Yeah, but now the rivers are. Sorry. Thanks.
Thank you, Fabio, for your speech, but sadly to sharing this very bad news about the floods in Brazil. I hope that there will not be human and non-human victims in this time. So anyway,
Guilherme, sorry, just because someone may be not reading, Guilherme put the positivist motto, followed by the Brazilian positivist church. It's written there: love as the beginning, order as the base, progress as the end. That is written in the stamp, and in the middle, a Greek letter.
Okay, thank you. So Renato, question for you now. Fabio, you can try to take a cup of coffee, or at least what the news. So Renato, when we are speaking of those reception in the Brazil, what is the uses of the past and the statuary in the urban reforms in Recife since beginning of 20th century? What kind of uses of the past we can speak about, we can discuss about?
Okay, well, first of all, I have to say that I'm very sympathetic to what's happening in the south of the country. The floodings have been horrible. We have seen terrible images from the destruction that is taking place there because of the rains. So my solidarity to all the people in the south of Brazil going through this disaster. Well, I have advised a few students on studying the uses of the past, and I'd like to start by trying to make a distinction between reception and uses of the past. This is not always easy because they overlap each other, these terms. By uses of the past, I try to mean the past used politically and culturally on purpose, not an idea of continuity specifically, but being aware that continuity is not present, but still using it to affect the present. So it's a self-awareness of the past being used politically to interfere with the purposes which are not always legal, let's put it this way. Reception, I take it as something that arrives to us here in the present a little bit less influenced by political reasons. But it's not that there is a lack of political reason, but it follows different paths maybe. Use of the past, I take it as a little bit more political. I use hard dog to talk about uses of the important and they overlap many times. But I advise a few students, and I've been doing that for a few years, to look at the squares and public spaces in the city of Recife and to look for signs of classical replication and imitation. And we can find many of them. We can find them at temples, religious temples, of course, but we can also find them in public buildings, especially law universities, law colleges. They normally use columns that will try and remind students of their classical connection, normally very large columns to indicate greatness, to indicate sound institutions. And so I have told them, listen, let's have a closer look at those aspects, architectural aspects. Let's try and find out who had the idea at first, who had ordered and paid for those constructions. Probably they had something in mind. They had the classic world in mind. And statues, yes, those are very interesting. We have this very big square here in Recife called Republic Square. But interestingly, they have a lot of Roman statues there, of goddesses, Roman goddesses there around the square. So why were they in the first place? Who had the idea to put those statues there? That's what we try and to to attract the attention to our students too. Someone had the ideas. Why Rome? Why women? Why only goddesses there? So we don't have a god, we have only goddesses. So there is an aspect of gender involved. So beauty and decoration, decorative aspects were involved, but they were also related to the world of the feminine representation. So there is something of gender there involved. Whereas when we go to other public areas, it's normally the statues of Roman men that we are going to find. So probably the power is related to men, and decorative. There's a reading of gender there involved. So there is a separation of worlds, a world of the feminine and a world of the masculine. And there is a very interesting bridge here in Recife called Ponte Mauricio de Nassau. Bridge Mauricio de Nassau was a Dutch governor here in Recife in the 17th century. And on both sides of the bridge, there were two pairs of plinths where they would put statues, yes, so blocks of concrete where they would place statues on both sides of the bridge. And we had access to the initial documents there for personalities related to the Pernambuco history. So related to the local personalities. And so they thought, oh, who are we going to choose to place there on the plinths? And so they thought of 4 names, Brazilian names, so people from Pernambuco. And in the end, lo and behold, we ended up with 4 Roman statues. Something went awry in the middle of the process when we could not figure out what. So how did a project that had envisaged 4 Pernambucano statues ended up with 4 Roman statues? And it was never explained. So we tried to find the explanation, and there was nothing there. So we had to look elsewhere for that explanation. We had to look at the cultural perspectives and how Rome was seen by the people here in Pernambuco. And so actually this explains very much why in the state anthem there are mentions of Romans, the new Romans and Roman warriors. So the government and the elite, they were thinking in classical manners. They were taking Europe as more important as Pernambuco. But the funny thing is that at the beginning, the original idea was to emphasize local personalities. So this shift from local personalities to Roman statues has to be explained. And I think this is related to uses of the past. And how at the end of the day they realized, oh no, let's think twice, and we don't need those personalities here anymore. Let's put classical personalities that people might be able to recognize. But who might be able to recognize them? Maybe local personalities would be far easier to be recognized than the Roman statues. So they were thinking of a very specific public. So the view of the pedestrians was being guided. People walking by, going through, walking across that bridge, they would encounter those Roman figures at either of the ends, and probably if they were from the elite, they could have the key to read and understand and decipher those statues. But the majority of the population would probably look in awe, oh, how beautiful that is, how majestic. But anyway, it's not part of the history. It's the statues of celebrities, of personalities from the Roman history. So not from the Brazilian history. So there are many other examples of that. Theaters that have also reliefs that that remind us of and calls to mind Roman signs and references, but very few Brazilian references. So we have to consider that the classical references, they dominate. They overtake the space that could have been occupied by more Brazilian references. So there's a choice then, clear choices. And the choices tend to be, they are prone to represent Roman or Greek Roman imagery in detriment to Brazilian imagery. And that is not just coincidental. So it shows how the Roman Greek culture is still very much ingrained in our elitist minds. Not only in the 19th century, this goes on, and you can still find it nowadays. But obviously, we were influenced by other movements, cultural movements, modernism, for example. So yes, things have diluted a bit. Things have changed, but it is still there. We can find traces of it. So when we point out these aspects to students, they get more interested in studying history, ancient history, because it has more connection with their reality, with local communities, with their day-to-day activities. They walk around the city, and they can see those signs. They can finally recognize them, and we offer them the possibility to read them and to understand where they come from. And they're being resignified naturally. But we teach about that, we talk about that, we exploit those changes, that mobility. And so that's how important, I think, working with users of the past can be. Initially, that was also my only option, because as I told you, we have a line of research in antiquity here in our postgraduate program. Now we do. It's still a young program, but for 2 years, we've been supervising students studying antiquity, ancient history, and also classical archaeology. But that's not something that we had 10 years ago. So our way of entering the field of studying antiquity was through uses of the past. And it worked admirably well at that time, considering that we didn't have that tradition here in Pernambuco.
Okay, Professor, maybe we can maybe add a little bit later, because I know Professor Guilherme and Renata very soon need to go. So I just asked 2 short questions for them.
No,
very,
I'm
very
going
short.
to wrap up. So, yes, I'm going to wrap up now. So that's...
Okay, Renata, one short question for you. What kind of Brazilian book or movie you can suggest dedicated to classics that could be maybe used for those classics lover?
Yes, I was thinking about that, and I'm not sure as if I can tell you a movie, because it didn't occur any to me at this moment. Maybe my colleagues can help with that, but I believe that books here in Brazil, we have many, and I think it's very interesting to think about what kind of books, because if we consider academic, nowadays we have a large amount of bookings in classical archaeology here, and we have translations. So we have lots of interesting books from Professor Funari, that it's for different ages. He's a person that I used to write about Roman history, not only to academic, but also to the main public. So we have including school books that he and his wife wrote. His wife worked with Egypt and Egyptologists. So Professor Pedro Paulo Funari has different types of publications in this area, and his wife Raquel Funari, also more linked to Egypt. And I also think that literature is also a very interesting way of seeing this Greeks and Romans presence, and in the way Brazilian are doing this. So as I'm looking for literature and also architecture now, no? The links between politics and the way the cities are built, as Renato was pointing, with all these homages and his the way they were imagining cities, no, this connections. It's really interesting that here in Latin America, and it's not just in Brazil, there is this tradition in the 19th century that politicians and in some way or another are linked to politics and literature. And it's very interesting because we have people defending different ideas of Greece and Rome. So, for example, I'm just thinking that if we consider the 19th century, we have Machado de Assis, which has a very funny story, a short one that he wrote about Alcibiades in Rio de Janeiro. He found a way out through all the paths to a link, and he was very, impressive with the idea that he used to wear trousers. Was his first main problem, no, to walk in Rio de Janeiro in 19th century. And then Machado de Assis is very clever to criticize all Brazilian politics in that moment throughout Alcibiades' eyes, for instance. So you have in literature different ways in Brazil. I'm considering here Machado de Assis because it's very known, a very important author here in Brazil. We have lots of, he has lots of books referring to Greece and Rome in literature. And if we think about poets, we are going to find lots of them. So symbolism is a very interesting way of knowing this. And also, I also am struck at this moment also by the some feminist authors from the end of the 19th century that different authors that used to write about human rights throughout Apuleio, because all those authors like Apuleius or Ovid that works with metamorphoses in a way or another, or magic and all this kind of things, it was very interesting ways like in Brazilian literature, it was used by women to change reality, and this means women voting, for example, and how they do this. So we have in literature, as if you check, there are lots of books that do that. The point is that what I always comment nowadays, I understand it better, is that we do not pay attention. So when we do classical reception, we started understanding this in a very different way. So we can also have in Paulo Leminski poetry. He's very clever in light poetry. In Latin, he used to write poems in Latin in the 70s, evoking phrases that really look like to the same Brazilian sense that any person in Portuguese could read that Latin against dictatorship. For example, he has very interesting poems, criticize the government in Latin, and this kind of thing. So poetry, literature, as if you are more familiar with the idea of classical reception, you're going to find a lot of things and very interesting things in Brazil. So I think that it's just some tips. In academic, we are doing lots of things. We have lots of colleagues, but also literature is, if you look for it, we have many examples. But films, I will leave for my colleagues. Maybe they have a better idea.
Okay, and just Renata, one last question for you, just one sentence. Your advice for new future student of classics, what you will say to him or her?
I would say to them to study classics. There are very different things there for us to learn, and it's a huge, it's very many different cultures there. So, well, of course, we have problems over there like we have in nowadays, but they are amazing. I think they have a different perception of our reality, and we still having much things in common and things we can in a way or another learn for them, and or even say, no, I don't want, but we need to learn them.
Okay, thank you, Renata. I know that you are run to meetings. So, Guilherme, the same two questions for your first book or movie or video game. It's also fine if you know from Brazilian some that could be used for promotion of classics around the world.
It's difficult to speak about the books or articles, video games from Brazil because we're not exactly we produce in Portuguese, so it's difficult to connect in this way. But today the people can use Chat GPT to translate everything. So anyway, you can pick up. Everyone can download an article or something like that and put in ChatGPT and read, Russian or Chinese. Of course, I'm not telling this is exactly the more accurate way to learn things, but it's a way that was impossible in the middle of 20th century to know something about this periphery, these places around the world that, like Brazil. Perhaps I think that today it's very difficult to express my feelings about video games, for example. But I love video games. I'm part of the generation of video games. People that was children in the 80s. So I've been growing up seeing the transformations in video games. Today, we have this Ubisoft Assassin's Creed series. There are as a celebrity among the games. And there is the Assassin's Creed Odyssey that shows the life of a person who travels in time to learn about Greek. But I'm not sure that this is a good way to learn about Greece, but a good way to entertain himself. I think that about movies, we have to take care about the Hollywood productions of movies. A very dear colleague from Pernambuco, as Renato Pinto, José Maria Gomes de Souza Neto, is a very huge name, isn't it? José Maria Gomes de Souza Neto. It's just one person, believe me. So, but he's a very nice and very interesting researcher about films. So I'd like to, if I have someone to indicate as a good beginning in Brazilian, in the case of Portuguese, I would say that José Neto has lots of interesting articles about Hollywood productions in a very critical way. So it's interesting to considering what he wrote and see the movie. This is a nice way to young people, for example, to compare how the Hollywood productions change the past to respond their own present expectations. So in this way, I would say that José Maria Neto would be a very nice beginning in Brazilian, as a Brazilian scholar, to learn a bit more about movies and ancient history.
Okay. And your advice for the newcomers, the new generation of the future students?
Be bold, be brave, everyone who lives in this world now has to decide what world we want in the future. So humanities are facing a huge challenge now, because every time here in Canada, it's very common to hear people. I'm so sorry to hear this kind of expression about history. For example, I have some colleagues here in the University of Quebec at Montreal, and some students expressed them to me. What would you do with the BA in history? Because this is the problem. Society and the devalorization of humanities are growing up everywhere, I guess. And this is a problem that we face in the future. So if you want to get in history, archaeology, literature, or classics, do it better, do it well. Try to think different your job, your studies to change the world, to change things now, because we need this change in the future. If not, we are going to technocrats and perhaps a eugenic society. I'm not very positive about the future if we really do not value the importance of human sciences around the world. So believe in yourself, study a lot, because you will find your path in this career. It's better to embrace a career that you love than to embrace another one that I will get more money, etc. You have to love something, so go on this path.
Thank you, Guilherme. And the last two questions for Renato. So your book, movie, video game, board game, anything related to Brazil and ancient world?
I know we're very short of time. We're running out of time here, so I'll be very concise. Well, I cannot say much about movies or games myself. I think my colleagues have already done much better than me. But I'd like to recommend a few things more in the field of literature. The first thing is translations. There is a very competent scholar in Brazil called Maria Aparecida de Oliveira Silva. Maria Aparecida de Oliveira Silva is a fantastic translator of classics. She has translated many works of classics here in Brazil. She's extremely competent, and I really recommend her translations into Portuguese because, as I told you, sometimes language can be a barrier that has to be overcome. So she helps a lot when she translates important authors from the past, from the classics to Portuguese. So I really recommend her translations. Another thing is there was an author, now a late author, unfortunately, called Max Malman, and he wrote two novels about ancient Rome. And he was very creative. He was not a scholar, but he was very creative, and he consulted many historians to write about Rome. So I really recommend his books. Later I can write his name here, type his name here, and write the title of the book. And finally, some very important authors from Brazilian literature touched classics and aspects of mythology which were overlooked because they had more successful works and they were neglected in time. So Machado de Assis, who is considered one of the best writers, in Brazil, he wrote a few short stories about Roman mythological representatives, and they were very interesting because there was an aspect of homoerotism involved in the tales. So I recommend that we look for those maybe forgotten or not so famous works from these writers in the 19th century. There was more there than we can imagine. So that's it.
And
thank you for bearing.
Thank you for Renata, your advice for young students.
Oh, well, yeah, stick together. There's a strength in numbers. Yeah, my colleagues have already mentioned the hurdles. Yeah, there are so many of them. But if we stick together, if we work as a community, if we are completely aware of the difficulties we are prone to find, we can better survive this environment. So yes, let's stick together and move on. Thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Renata, if I actually block you for speaking more. I apologize for this.
No, it's okay. No worries. No offense taken.
We will have chances to improve this text when the students transcribe it probably in a few months, so we can go through this and maybe double check some names and see about some improvements. Anyway, I just want to say my best regards and best wishes and great thankfulness for all of you and your participation. It was very interesting, very useful. I will say very creative. Looking forward to read this. I will send you very soon your Zoom recording so that you have, and I send the first email with this Gilberto presentation. Sadly, we don't have time to play it here, but I send it to you so you can play it at your home. So I think it's also fine that you can see about his research and his very interesting ideas about the Afro-American perspective in Brazil. Also, Professor Fabio probably left of these flood issues. So thanks a lot again. Looking forward. Stay in touch. I wish you have a nice weekend or working day if there is still like in Canada or Brazil. And we will try to communicate for this kind of future edition. I cannot promise which publishing house, probably Lexington Books, but we are going to see about this because I'm editing book series over there. So maybe I can try to put it inside the book series, which I feel it's very, very useful to have this variety of approach. Have a nice day, nice weekend, and please regard my apologize if I block you something or I didn't manage so well.
Thank you very much for inviting us and sharing and doing this. Yeah, it was very nice. Thank you.
Then bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Goran. It was a huge pleasure. Bye-bye. Have a good night. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.